Chapter 875. Without saying a word, Wu Qi pulled out the Kunwu sword and waved it. The king's laughter stopped abruptly, and he gave Wu Qi a wretched glare before turning his head angrily away. Wielding the Kunwu sword, Wu Qi walked slowly into the circle of the kings of the council and said in a flat voice, "I'm not very talented, but I'd like to recommend myself to investigate the assassination of His Majesty. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to get to the bottom of the matter, but I'll never let go of anyone who might be related to it." The king stared at Wu Qi for a long time, then King Yangshan suddenly waved his hand and said, "Fine, we'll give you whatever power you want. But, you can't act alone. All 18 kings of the council must send their confidants to follow you, and you're not allowed to do anything to harm important ministers of Du." When he said the last sentence, King Yangshan's tone did not change at all, but somehow he gave off a feeling that he was eager for Wu Qi to do whatever he wanted. As soon as King Li Shan said this, the leaders of the various powers in the Great Hall nodded in agreement, which made King Xian Shan's face grow unsightly. After a long silence, King Xian Shan flicked his sleeve and snapped, "A snake can't have its head." King Yangshan and the other kings of the council were shocked. They looked at each other for a moment, then said in unison, "From today on, we will never leave the palace without permission. Those who disobey will be executed." King Ding Shan added, "All the princes of His Majesty must stay in the palace with all their relatives unconditionally. If anyone dares to disobey," Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he said coldly, "That's a great kindness, but I'd like to ask all kings to understand that if the confidants you've sent to keep an eye on me are suspected of colluding with the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League to harm Du, don't blame me for being cruel and merciless, and don't blame me for investigating all of you. Who knew better than this torch dragon of the Great Highness about the assassination of Emperor Haozuan?" King Yin Shan, who was standing next to King Yangshan, snapped, "Why not? Who ordered the Flying Bear army to imprison King Yangshan and hunt down King Qingqiu? Who didn't wait to investigate the assassination of His Majesty before impatiently claiming to be the crown prince and coveting the throne of the human emperor? Who disregarded His Majesty's secret edict and—" King Xian Shan glared angrily at Wu Qi. After pondering for a while, he suddenly sneered and said, "Fine, we'll do as the King of East Sea says. This prince doesn't care about the position of crown prince. If not for the fact that I'm worried about the fate of Du, do you really think that I would care about the position of crown prince? Do you really think that this king is someone who fights for power?" In the great hall of the imperial palace in Liangzhu, King Xian Shan glared at Wu Qi in anger. On the day of His Majesty's assassination and the 2 days before and after, all the imperial guards on duty were arrested and sent to the gods' prison along with all their relatives. The accusation Wu Qi had put on him was too heavy and dark. Even though he was the oldest prince of Emperor Haozuan, he could not bear the accusation. The crime of being unfilial and rebellious was an extremely serious one in Du. If someone was recognized as unfilial and rebellious, everything he had could be taken away in an instant. Especially at this critical moment, if King Xian Shan was really considered unfilial, his life would be in danger. King Yangshan cleared his throat and interrupted King Yin Shan's angry rant. "Well, let's not talk about these things for now," he said coolly. "My brothers, you should know what is the most important thing right now. Let's quickly come up with a countermeasure on how to deal with the invasion of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. By the way, summon the elites of the Punishment Court and have them thoroughly investigate the assassination of His Majesty under the supervision of our trusted subordinates. What do you think?" When the 6 kings of the council, King Yangshan, King Yin Shan, King Tsang Shan, King Hao Shan, King Ding Shan, and King Gu Shan, stood neatly in the center of the great hall, the hall fell silent. King Li Shan and the other princes exchanged a glance, then retreated to the side with the civil and military officials behind them. The other 11 kings of the council, divided into 4 groups, strode forward quietly and stood in a circle with King Yangshan and the other 5 princes. King Li Shan, who was also dressed in a king's robe and was surrounded by thousands of civil and military officials and seemed to be the weakest in the hall, cleared his throat and walked out slowly. He cupped his fist and said to King Xian Shan, "Big brother, what the King of East Sea said is very true. We'd better find out the cause of father's death first and find out who the mastermind is before we discuss the ownership of the throne. When King Xian Shan walked out with his men, 5 old men in king's robes came slowly to King Yang Shan's side, cupped their fists, and bowed to him. King Yang Shan returned the gesture without saying a word, and the 6 kings stood in a row. There was no doubt that King Yang Shan and the 5 kings of the council belonged to the same group, and they were the strongest among the kings. Even King Yang Shan was rendered speechless by Wu Qi's words. If Wu Qi was really given this power, and if he really did whatever he wanted in Liangzhu, the consequences would be too terrible. But, they had already said that Wu Qi would not be given this power. King Xian Shan took off his robe angrily and gave up the chance to ascend the throne at this time. Now, who dared to say that Wu Qi would not be given this power? Did it mean that they were unwilling to find out the truth about Emperor Haozuan's assassination? Wu Qi chuckled and said in a low voice, "No wonder he dares to call himself crown prince." Stamping his feet angrily, King Xian Shan strode out of the great hall with his head held high. As he walked, he shouted at the top of his lungs, ordering the imperial guards to assemble and open all the palaces and pavilions. He was going to lead the army into the palace to search for clues about Emperor Haozuan's assassination. Before long, King Xian Shan was gone, and only his roar could be heard coming from afar, "I'm the most filial to my father. If I find out who killed my father, I'll cut him into 1,000 pieces." King Xian Shan walked out of the great hall, followed by at least 30,000 civil and military officials who lined up in a neat line. These officials were the representatives of Deyu's imperial clan and great clans. They basically represented 20% of the imperial clan and great clans in Liangzhu, and they stood behind King Xian Shan. Compared with King Li Shan, who only had the support of 3,000 civil and military officials, King Xian Shan had an absolute advantage in both actual strength and momentum. The other kings were silent for a long time, and then nodded slowly. As soon as Wu Qi got the document and the medallion he had made on the spot, he immediately gave his first order. An enormous pressure pressed down heavily over the palace. "Senior Torch Dragon, please transform your soul into a human form and follow me to the prison," Wu Qi said coldly. Waving the Kunwu sword in his hand, Wu Qi said coolly, "The so-called unlimited power means that I can arrest, investigate, imprison, torture, or even kill someone's family and friends in front of me." The 17 kings of Deyu, who held the most power and held the most military power, exchanged a glance. Then, King Yang Shan said in a deep voice, "Internal and external troubles are rising at the same time. Some people with wild ambitions can cause chaos, but we can't." Wu Qi said dryly, "A snake can't have a head, and Deyu is not a snake. If King Xian Shan is worried about state affairs, he can ask the kings of the council to work together to deal with them. The 18 kings of Deyu are highly respected, experienced, and steady, and have always been His Majesty's best assistants in dealing with state affairs." Before the kings could say anything, Wu Qi sneered and said, "Please think about it, your highnesses. Who could have framed His Majesty in Deyu's palace without the help of people of your statuses?" Wu Qi's words were a bit contradictory, but no one mocked him for they all sensed a strong killing intent in them. The scene of Wu Qi smashing the east gate of Liangzhu with the fiend-slaying sword formation came to everyone's mind again. Even those kings of the council who did not get along with King Yang Shan shut their mouths. They would never argue with a man with a Kunwu sword. King Xian Shan took off his royal robe and threw it heavily to the ground, then snapped, "I'll say the ugly words first. If anything happens to Deyu, I swear I won't let you off." With a strange laugh, he reached out a hand and pointed at the noses of Wu Qi and the others. "Remember, there is no emperor in Deyu now, so the kings of the council are in charge of state affairs. Now that the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League are making moves against Deyu, don't blame me for being merciless if you hurt Deyu. Arrest all the eunuchs and guards around His Majesty, and all their relatives and family members must be captured alive and thrown into prison." One of the kings of the council stared at Wu Qi in horror and said angrily, "What do you mean by unlimited power?" The kings of the council turned at the same time to look at King Li Shan and a few other princes who held real power and were supported by others. Their faces were extremely unsightly, and the faces of the representatives of the aristocratic clans behind them did not look any better. After a few breaths of silence, the princes bowed deeply at the same time, but none of them said a word. Apart from King Xian Shan and King Li Shan, there were 8 princes in the hall, divided into 3 groups. All the kings of the council were present, except for Gao, who had been conferred the title of King Wei Shan and led the Yuxiong army to guard the western region of Yuxiong Plain. King Li Shan could not help but snort bitterly as he watched King Xian Shan walk out with so many civil and military ministers. He glanced around and made eye contact with a few middle-aged men dressed in princes' robes. Their gazes were as sharp as blades, and sparks could be seen in the air. No one knew who was the first one to strike, but a few muffled bangs were heard, and the air in the hall rolled. The princes staggered a step back at the same time. The matter was settled. The 17 kings of the council jointly issued an official document of unlimited power to Wu Qi with their private seals. Glancing at the 17 kings of the council, Wu Qi grinned coldly and said, "Therefore, I ask you to grant me the right to kill first and report later, or not to report first. I want to kill, and I have to kill to find out what happened that day. If you are sincere in doing this for Du, for His Majesty, and for the great plan of the human race, then I ask for unlimited power." Everyone in the hall was stunned at the same time. Some of them even slapped their own heads in exasperation. How could they forget about this? Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi casually threw the Kunwu sword out of the hall and activated Liangzhu's defensive formation once again. The crime was too serious. Just as King Xian Shan could not bear the blame of unfilial Wu Qi had pinned on him, no one in the hall could bear the suspicion of this crime. One of the princes laughed and said, "The King of East Sea. What makes him qualified to be in charge of such an important matter?" "Ji Kuei, you said His Highness the Crown Prince has the ambition of a wolf, but you can't say that." Chapter 876. Mount Torch Dragon trembled slightly, and a deep, hoarse voice slowly came out of it. "I've been cultivating here for countless years, and even my fleshly body has turned to stone. Following the decree of Sacred Emperor, I've kept my soul inside and never let it out to stir up any trouble. So, how could I know what's happening in the outside world?" Wu Qi looked down at Torch Dragon and said coldly, "It's not up to you to decide whether you know anything or not. Senior, please manifest your soul as soon as possible and go to the prison. Otherwise, you will die today, and your soul will perish forever." Zhu Long twisted his body angrily, and the huge Mount Torch Dragon immediately shook as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting apart. The main hall also shook and almost collapsed. Torch Dragon roared furiously, "How dare you bully me like this, you little brat? Do you really think that you can do whatever you want to me just because I'm trapped here by Sacred Emperor?" Wu Qi didn't say a word. He just waved his hand towards the sky, and the 108 green sword shadows transformed into long beams of light that slowly descended from the sky and approached Torch Dragon's body. The fierce sword intent came whistling over. The several miles thick rock layer on Torch Dragon's body, which had been accumulating for countless years, was smashed by the sword intent, turning into fine dust and drifting away with the wind, revealing the dragon's body, which was purple-black in color and densely covered with huge scales that measured at least 1,000 feet in circumference. Now, the crowd could clearly see what Mount Torch Dragon looked like. The colossal Torch Dragon had coiled up into a huge mountain, with his head right in the middle, and the Great Hall of Great Yu's imperial court rested neatly on top of a huge candle placed on top of his head. The candle was emanating a strong primal aura. Clearly, it was also an extraordinary treasure produced in the primal world. The bronze candle was not made of gold, iron, stone, or jade, nor was it made of any of the 5 elements. It had a faint metallic luster, and a flame that was 1,000 feet thick and 10,000 feet tall soared into the sky. Yu's Great Hall of Imperial Court floated above the flame. The square where the main hall was located was a single piece. Countless complicated formation diagrams and runes were engraved on the bottom of the square. Thousands of water tank-sized, colorless, and chaotic, primal stones were inlaid on these formation diagrams and runes. They were constantly absorbing the flames spurted out by the big candle and sending the endless energy into the surrounding formation diagrams. Wu Qi's eyes flashed. With his current attainments in array formations, he could easily see that the core of this array was on this giant candle. The innate primordial supreme treasure used it as the original power to stimulate the power of the energy stones to control the operation of the entire Liangzhu's defensive formation. If anything went wrong with the candle, Emperor Haozuan would not be able to control the defensive formation in Liangzhu. After pondering for a brief moment, Wu Qi glanced at the thousands of huge primal stones. The so-called vital stones were the ancestors of the first batch of spirit stones that were condensed from the boundless chaotic qi when Pangu split the world apart. Every single vital stone contained boundless energy, and any one of them could become the energy core of a divine grade grand formation. Moreover, a divine grade grand formation was capable of posing a lethal threat to a Dao reasoning expert. Wu Qi could not help but marvel at the terrifying power of the formation in Liangzhu, which was made up of thousands of energy stones. While sighing with emotion, Wu Qi firmly controlled the Kunwu sword and thrust it toward Torch Dragon's body. The sword intent swept across the sky, leaving countless tiny scratches on Torch Dragon's scales. The sword intent and the scales clashed violently, producing countless sparks and a deafening rumble. Torch Dragon's body trembled slightly, and an ancient, suffocating aura towered into the sky. Fine, I'll let you do whatever you want. Listen well, boy, if you can't find out the connection between me and His Majesty's assassination, don't blame me for being rude to you. As Torch Dragon roared angrily, a beam of light rushed out of his forehead and quickly transformed into an old man, standing no more than 3 feet tall and with white hair and beard. The old man was skinny, so skinny that he looked like a mummy. But his eyes were full of vigor. A sun was spinning slowly in his left eye, and a crescent moon was spinning rapidly in his right eye. The light from both the sun and the moon shone tens of feet into the distance, and no one could look him in the eye except Wu Qi. The primordial Dharma eye and the divine eyes of sun and moon collided fiercely. Wu Qi's eyes ached and tears rolled down his cheeks, while Torch Dragon's eyes flickered with a fiery light. His body swayed and he took a step back. Both snorted coldly at the same time. Torch Dragon proudly raised his head and clasped his hands behind his back, while Wu Qi waved his hand. Princess Zhanglu quickly came to Torch Dragon's side. 360 spirit thorns, which Princess Zhanglu had refined from the bones of spirit ghosts, quietly sank into the acupoints of Torch Dragon's nascent divinity. As soon as the thorns entered his body, the light of the sun and moon in Torch Dragon's eyes quickly dimmed. He shook his body, and a trace of purple gold blood slowly trickled down from the corner of his mouth. He gave Princess Zhanglu a look in horror. He wanted to say something, but he did not even have the strength to speak. After inheriting the ancient Tao of divinity, Princess Zhanglu had countless strange curses at her disposal. Even though Torch Dragon was an ancient god, he was caught off guard by Princess Zhongli's curse, which had broken his vitality and turned him into a harmless lamb. After giving Torch Dragon's nascent divinity a deep look, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Somebody, throw Torch Dragon into the divine prison and keep him under strict surveillance. Ao Buzan, Lord Xiansheng, you are in charge of the safety of him and the other criminals. The rest are at your disposal." While Ao Buzan was grumbling, Ao Buzan walked to Torch Dragon's side and picked him up. Looking at the white-bearded Torch Dragon, Ao Buzan sighed with emotion and said, "Why is he another male?" While Ao Buzan was grumbling, cold sweat was trickling down Torch Dragon's forehead. Cupping his fist and bowing to all the kings of the council in the Great Hall, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Your Highnesses, please let me have the Directorate of Celestials in Liangzhu. I don't want anyone who is above the rank of punishment officer, and I only need those servants on duty in the Directorate of Celestials." In Diyu, the punishment court mostly targeted the sons of the rich and powerful clans. Once they violated the law, they would immediately mete out a thunderous punishment. In particular, for the sake of their own interests, the powerful clans in Diyu would sometimes do things that violated the laws of Diyu, such as using the people as blood sacrifices. If such things happened, the punishment court would severely punish these clans. Apart from that, the punishment court would also punish those immortals and itinerant cultivators who stirred up trouble. If any immortals or itinerant cultivators harmed the people of Great Yu at will, the punishment army would hunt them down and kill them, vowing to never let them have an easy time. To be precise, the punishment court was an organization specializing in violence and espionage, similar to the embroidered uniform guards employed by the human emperor. There were countless experts in the vast directorate of Celestials, and they were the hunting dogs and falcons of Yu. They practiced special cultivation techniques, and were best at tracking and torturing people. They could squeeze out all the information they needed from even a disintegrated soul. In order to solve the case of Emperor Haozuan's assassination, it was necessary for him to transfer some experts from the punishment court. King Yangshan and the others naturally agreed to Wu Qi's request. Since they had given Wu Qi unlimited power, they did not need a mere punishment court. Under his command, countless experts from the Directorate of Celestials in Liangzhu were quickly summoned, and all those who were related to the assassination of Emperor Haozuan were taken into Great Yu's imperial prison, the Divine Prison, which was located in the heart of the secret palace. The so-called Divine Prison was a prison used to imprison gods. In ancient times, humans and gods fought for control of this part of the world. If the human race captured the defeated gods alive, they would be imprisoned in the divine prison and tortured until they learned all kinds of mystic arts and divine abilities, as well as everything they knew. The Directorate of Celestials of the human race inherited many mystic arts from the ancient gods, and 90% of them came from the divine prison. It was a deadly place from which even the mighty ancient gods could not escape, and it was the place that struck terror into the hearts of the aristocratic clans of Yu. When Wu Qi led a large group of people to the divine prison through a special teleportation formation, King Xian Shan had already rushed into the imperial palace with over 1 million soldiers from the Flying Bear army. King Xian Shan carried out his promise just now, intending to search every inch of the imperial palace for clues about Emperor Haozuan's assassination. But, the imperial palace stretched for tens of thousands of miles, and with over 1 million people sprinkled into it, it was like a handful of mung beans sprinkled into a great lake. How could they find any clues? Others could tell that King Xian Shan was just putting on an act. But, if he could do it, why couldn't others? Before long, King Li Shan and a few other princes, who wanted to do something about the succession to the throne, had also brought their men into the imperial palace, searching everywhere. If King Yangshan and the others had not been sitting in the center of the palace and not allowed King Li Shan and the others to act recklessly, perhaps the imperial palace of Yu would have been turned upside down by them with restrictive magic. In God's prison, Wu Qi ordered the punishment court's servants and guards to do whatever they wanted and interrogate those who were detained. As a result, a lot of clues soon emerged. First, the imperial edicts of the human emperor of Yu were made by a special office with special materials, and each had a serial number. The secret edict used to pass on the throne to King Yangshan was indeed an official edict with a serial number. But, the chief eunuch who was in charge of these blank edicts had died of a serious illness last year, so there was no record of where the edict had been used. Second, on the night of the human emperor's assassination, the imperial guards who were on duty outside the Great Hall of the court had all disappeared. Thousands of imperial guards had disappeared without a trace in the heavily guarded imperial palace of Yu. But, their disappearance did not attract anyone's attention, and they were not included in the rotation of the imperial guards in the next few days. But, the general who was in charge of arranging the rotation of the imperial guards had also disappeared these days. Third, on the same night of the human emperor's assassination, the eunuchs who were on duty at the main gate, the second gate, the third gate, and the various halls and sentry posts had all disappeared. At least, when Wu Qi ordered the revered elders of the secret palace to search Yu's imperial palace with a mystic art, these people were indeed nowhere to be found. Wu Qi was not in the mood to be polite to these detained people, so he ordered the punishment court to interrogate them with the most direct soul-searching art. As a result, all kinds of intelligence and clues were quickly extracted, and with the 3 major clues as the core, all kinds of fragmented information and hearsay were constantly gathered, giving a rough idea of what had happened. While the punishment court was dealing with those small fries, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Lu came to torch Dragon's soul with a group of ferocious generals of the East Sea. With a smile on his face, he nodded at Torch Dragon's soul, who was chained to the torture instrument, and said, "Old senior, I know you must know something. Tell me, and I'll let you reincarnate. If you don't, I'll cut you into pieces." Torch Dragon stared at Wu Qi with wide eyes and shook his head contemptuously. "I don't know anything." Chapter 877. The so-called immortal's worry was actually a large black net with amazing elasticity. Each wire was attached with a rune, and when the blood-red runes and the black wires were combined, they looked like countless black and red venomous insects intertwining with each other, exuding a bone-piercing coldness that struck fear into the hearts of those who looked at it. The net measured nearly 1,000 feet in circumference, and hovered in the largest prison in the prison. The empty prison was shrouded in a misty mist, and there were no actual walls. Over 100 punishment court servants were preparing all kinds of torture instruments, and from time to time, they raised their heads and laughed excitedly at Torch Dragon's nascent divinity. Torch Dragon was tied to the immortal's worry, and countless black thorns, thousands of times thinner than a cow's hair, that could not be detected by ordinary people's divine sense, poked out of the thin wires. These tens of feet-long black thorns pierced into Torch Dragon's body, twisting and turning into thousands of restrictive runes of various sizes that fused inseparably with him. Unless Torch Dragon detonated his nascent divinity, there was no way he could break free from the immortal's worry, the most powerful restrictive artifact in the prison. In ancient times, this huge net had been used to imprison 64 of the 360 elders of the primordial god clan. 64 of the most powerful primordial gods had been trapped on the immortal's worry, but none of them had been able to escape. All of them had their divine energy slowly extracted by the immortal's worry, turned it into the power of the immortal's worry, and died after their souls were exhausted. Although Wu Qi did not ask the prison guards to activate the immortal's worry now, Torch Dragon's face had turned unsightly with so many black thorns seeping into his body. The skinny old man, who was no more than 3 feet tall, was trapped in such a pitch-black net, and he looked pitiful no matter how one looked at it. When he saw Wu Qi come in with his men, Torch Dragon snorted coldly and turned his head disdainfully. Wu Qi strode to Zhulong's side and slapped him 100 times in the face. Torch Dragon's cultivation was extremely astonishing. The human form formed by his primordial spirit was no different from his corporeal body. When Wu Qi slapped him in the face, his head swayed left and right, and the sound of the slaps was deafening. Now that Wu Qi's strength was frighteningly great, Torch Dragon's face was smashed into pieces, and a large amount of purple-gold liquid gushed out. The purplish-golden liquid was the life essence of Torch Dragon's soul, and the loss of a drop was equivalent to the destruction of a piece of his soul. The energy essence that Torch Dragon had lost when Wu Qi beat him was at least equal to the soul essence of several peak-level gold immortals. Zhu Long howled in exasperation, "King of East Sea, how dare you!" Wu Qi did not say a word. Taking the opportunity when Torch Dragon opened his mouth and howled, he grabbed him by the chin, reached out his hand and grabbed his teeth, then slowly pulled them out. 2 crisp cracking noises rang out as the 2 teeth turned into 2 clumps of strong purple-gold flame and slowly faded away. Torch Dragon's face turned paler again. Not waiting for Torch Dragon to scream again, Wu Qi took over a triangular wolf fang spear handed to him by a nearby punishment court officer, and slowly stabbed it into Torch Dragon's body from his chest. The spike was forged using boiling poisonous gold from the geocentric core. The so-called boiling poisonous gold was a metal formed after being immersed in the ancient poisonous fire of the geocentric for countless eons, after absorbing a great amount of poisonous gas and fire from the 5 elements metal essence. This metal was also known as evil gold. It did not bring any benefit to cultivators. Instead, anyone who touched it would die instantly, and if their soul touched it, it would immediately dissipate. Even those from the Fiend League rarely used this vile material to make magical artifacts, because they could not control the damage it could do to themselves. But, Great Yu specialized in mining this kind of evil metal, which was extremely harmful to cultivators, to make all kinds of torture tools. The triangular spike was forged with poisonous boiling gold, and had just been soaked in the venom of the red widow spider, the saliva of the green-kissed snake, the brain of the 9-legged centipede, and many other vicious creatures. As a result, its lethality to the soul had reached the peak. The spike pierced deep into Torch Dragon's chest. Torch Dragon's eyes suddenly widened, and it let out a shrill howl that reached the clouds. His body rapidly changed colors. His body, which was originally no different from a living person's, suddenly turned pitch black. Then, it quickly changed into red, blue, white, black, and other colors. Every time the color changed, Zhulong would roar in pain and tremble all over. A sizzling noise could be heard from Candle Dragon's chest. A fist-sized hole was left in his chest, and this strike caused a severe damage to his primordial spirit. His powerful primordial spirit, which was cultivated through countless years of severe cultivation, had lost at least 10% of its power. Torch Dragon's eyes shone brightly. Baring his teeth, he stared at Wu Qi and roared, "What are you going to do, boy?" Indifferently, Wu Qi pulled out the triangular spike and slowly pointed it at Torch Dragon's forehead. "Listen to me, Torch Dragon," he said coolly. "I don't care what ancient god you are, or what other identity you have, you are now a watchdog of mine, do you? Do you understand? You are just a watchdog now." Torch Dragon was so angry that his eyes bulged out. He roared and cursed Wu Qi, spitting saliva in all directions. However, Torch Dragon's vocabulary was too small. He kept cursing Wu Qi, calling him a little bastard and little bastard. Such insignificant lethality was nothing to Wu Qi, who was born at the bottom of society. A ruthless slap landed on Zhulong's face, causing Zhulong's head to tilt to the side, nearly sending his head flying. Glaring at Torch Dragon, Wu Qi sneered and said, "A qualified watchdog will at least bark a few times when a thief enters the door. You're just a watchdog. You didn't even bark when your master was killed. I really don't know what's the use of keeping you alive." The spike fiercely stabbed into Torch Dragon's shoulder, causing him to howl at the top of his lungs again. This time, a large amount of purple gold sweat gushed out of Torch Dragon's body. As the manifestation of his soul, every drop of sweat was the essence of his soul. In just a few breaths of time, Torch Dragon's body had become almost transparent. He stared at Wu Qi with hatred, as if he wanted to swallow Wu Qi in one bite. With a smile, Wu Qi pulled out the spike and pointed it at Torch Dragon's forehead again. "A dog that can't even watch the door properly will be killed and eaten. Many people around me will be interested in Torch Dragon's flesh and internal organs. Isn't that right, Goldhorn?" The Goldhorn brothers and the Goldfeather sisters, who were originally cute boys and girls, nodded at the same time. Their bodies above the waist rapidly expanded and turned into half of the ferocious dragon pythons of fire and ice. Four big mouths stared fixedly at Torch Dragon's soul, saliva dripping from their mouths. Torch Dragon's face grew more and more unsightly. Dragon pythons of fire and ice were the world of all dragons. Although Torch Dragon was an ancient god and had no blood relationship with the dragons passed down by Ao Buzan, his body still belonged to the dragons. Even Torch Dragon was well aware of the deterrence that dragon pythons of fire and ice posed to the dragon clan. He had no doubt that these four ferocious creatures could easily devour his fleshly body. After a moment of pondering, Torch Dragon said lightly, "What do you want to know?" Wu Qi looked at Torch Dragon in surprise, then shook his head and said, "No, you should be angry, despairing, and cursing me hysterically. You shouldn't talk to me so lightly." Torch Dragon looked at Wu Qi in surprise and shook his head as well. "What's wrong?" "Unfortunately, I've fallen into your hands." Wu Qi interrupted Torch Dragon and said with a cold grin, "With your identity and cultivation base, I've destroyed more than 70% of your nascent divinity, and yet, you can still talk to me so calmly as if nothing had happened. Do you really have such a big heart? If you are, why did the Sacred Emperor imprison you in the palace as the hub of the Great Formation and not release you after so many years?" Torch Dragon fell silent. He looked at Wu Qi curiously and asked, "So, why do you think so?" Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled, then nodded and said, "Old Torch Dragon, your true form is still out there. I didn't remove the fiend-slaying sword formation, so you can't run away. Are you willing to give up such a strong fleshly body?" Torch Dragon looked at Wu Qi in even more surprise. "What did you say, King of East Sea. This old man's primordial spirit is here, how can this old man escape? Wu Qi stared blankly at Torch Dragon for a long while, then suddenly burst into laughter. He grabbed Torch Dragon's primordial spirit, opened his mouth, and swallowed it. A strange aura spread out of Wu Qi's body. The first wisp of innate thievery energy extracted from the surrounding void all the energy essence of the soul that Torch Dragon had just lost, and kept injecting it into Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi's divine soul grew rapidly. Torch Dragon's soul howled in pain and struggled in his body, but under Wu Qi's powerful suppression, he could not move at all. In less than the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Torch Dragon's soul was digested by Wu Qi, and all the memories in his soul were squeezed out. Torch Dragon did not find any information about Emperor Haozuan's assassination in his soul. It seemed that he had been practicing in the palace for so many years and had never been involved in anything in the outside world, just as the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan had ordered him to do in those years. But, what interested Wu Qi was that there was a clear memory in this nascent divinity. 3 eons ago, when Emperor Haozuan had just ascended the throne, Torch Dragon suddenly obtained a mystic art, which allowed him to divide his nascent divinity into 3. An old man, a middle-aged man, and a young man, the 3 primordial spirits of the old, the middle-aged, and the young. The mystic art had greatly improved Torch Dragon's cultivation, and he could almost break free from the restrictive spell cast on him by Emperor Xianyuan. With the power of the Sun and Moon Torch, the #1 candlestick in the world, which was brewing in the chaos above his head, he could now control the ultimate defensive formation of Liangzhu. However, Torch Dragon had completely miscalculated this time. He had handed over one of his souls to satisfy Wu Qi's investigation, but he had never dreamed that Wu Qi would not reason with him at all. Instead, he had devoured his soul in such a barbaric way and searched through his memories. Grinning hideously, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Sure enough, this Torch Dragon is up to something. There is no information about His Majesty's assassination in this soul. What about the other 2 souls?" Before his voice could fade away, the ground suddenly began to shake violently. A furious roar rose into the sky, so loud that even Wu Qi, who was in the prison, could hear it clearly. "King of East Sea, you despicable boy! Give me back my soul." Chapter 878. Countless ministers of Deyu rushed out of the hall in a panic. Treading on dark clouds, the oracles flew up into the sky with the weak ministers, while the generals, clad in heavy armors and holding all kinds of weapons, hovered in the air with panic on their faces, nervously and cautiously looking at Torch Dragon Mountain, which was squirming violently. The mountain formed from Torch Dragon's body was shaking violently. Large pieces of flagstones kept falling off from his body, exposing his entire body. His 10,000 miles long body had no front claws, only 2 back claws. The scales on his body were purple-black, and the belly plate was a dazzling scarlet. Torch Dragon had no horns, but a huge candlestick stood in the middle of his forehead, which was madly spurting out a green flame to burn the great hall that floated above his head. Torch Dragon, who had coiled himself in a snake-like formation for countless years, was squirming violently. Slowly, his body uncoiled and stretched. A violent aura was wriggling crazily around his body, while countless pitch-black tornadoes wheeled around him. The shrill howls of the wind brought a piercing pain to people's ears, as if their souls were about to be shattered by the wind. The earth was shaking violently, and because of the tornadoes, huge holes kept appearing in the ground. When Torch Dragon's body was fully stretched out, and a green cloud of fire appeared beneath him, all the palaces and pavilions in Great Yu's imperial palace collapsed at the same time. All the flowers, plants, and trees on the 136,000 mountains in the huge imperial garden were shattered, and countless rocks were thrown into the air by the blast, revealing the 136,000 bronze pillars that were over 1,000 feet in diameter and at least 10 miles tall hidden under the mountains. With a loud clang, countless water tank-thick chains appeared on the Torch Dragon's huge body. These chains were originally invisible, but as the Torch Dragon struggled, they appeared at the same time. All the chains pierced deep into Zhulong's body and latched onto his long spine. The source of these chains was the 136,000 huge metal pillars. At the moment, every pillar was spurting out flames. The dark flames spread along the chains to Torch Dragon's body, quickly enveloping his body. These pitch-black flames were actually condensed from the coldest types of extreme Yin spiritual Qi and Gui water true Yin in the world. Although they looked like flames, they were actually the polar opposite of flames, extreme Yin ice flames. Even stones would be frozen into pieces when they touched these ice flames, and even steel would turn into ashes when it touched them. Torch Dragon was covered in layers of ice flames, and his violently squirming body suddenly stiffened. Not long after, along with a loud dragon roar, the torch of sun and moon above Torch Dragon's head emitted a large sheet of green light, and a terrifyingly high temperature poured down. Thousands of Dayu generals who were closest to Torch Dragon howled miserably and turned into wisps of green smoke in the midst of the green light. They were melted by the high temperature, and not even a trace of them was left. Everything that was covered by the green light, regardless of whether it was the soil, rocks, or anything else, had all melted into magma with a tinge of red and glaring white light. The Imperial Garden of Dayu was located in a separate small space, millions of miles in circumference. There were countless strange mountains and rivers in the vast garden, as well as all kinds of precious flowers, trees, and spirit herbs. It could be said to be the #1 blessed land on Panga continent. But, when it was illuminated by the torch of sun and moon, the whole garden suddenly turned into a sea of magma. Except for the 136,000 bronze pillars, all the other mountains, hills, rivers, lakes, and seas had turned into magma. King Xian Shan and the other princes had rushed into the palace with a large number of soldiers, claiming that they were looking for clues about the assassination of Emperor Haozuan. Now that Torch Dragon had suddenly launched his attack, the princes could still quickly flee into the sky under the protection of their confidants. But, the soldiers of Flying Bear Army and countless private guards they brought into the palace all howled miserably. No matter what their cultivation base was, they were all turned into wisps of smoke by the torch of sun and moon. There was even a prince and thousands of his confidants who did not have time to dodge. They could only scream as they turned into wisps of smoke and drifted into the sky at the same time. Among the oracles and civil officials who had fled into the sky, at least 10,000 people cried out in alarm. Clearly, they were the prince's supporters, but now that the man they supported was killed by Torch Dragon, it threw them into a complete panic. In addition to these people, there were countless other concubines, eunuchs, maids, and imperial guards in the palace. Emperor Haozuan was an extremely energetic man, so every few days he would select a new batch of beautiful women and send them to the palace to spread the seeds of Dayu's imperial clan. A rough calculation showed that there were tens of thousands of concubines officially registered in the imperial palace, and the number of eunuchs around them was enormous. But now, as soon as the blue light shone, all of them turned into wisps of smoke and drifted away. King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and the other princes, Chi-Chi, howled hoarsely, "Mother!" Torch Dragon's all-out attack had shaved off about 50% of the Yin ice flame wrapped around him, but he had also killed all the people in the palace who could not escape. The mothers of King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and the other princes lived in the palace. They were just ordinary women, and they relied entirely on the various spirit herbs given to them by Emperor Haozuan and their sons to keep them young and prolong their lives. How could they have any cultivation base? Now that the palace had turned into a pool of lava, all the concubines were dead, and the prince's mother, Chi-Chi, was dead. The members of Dayu's imperial clan and courtiers who had flown into the sky were in a state of chaos. Some of the most conservative courtiers of Dayu wept bitterly as if they had lost their parents. It was a great humiliation. When had such a thing ever happened in the history of Dayu? All the people in the palace were wiped out. Just when everything was in chaos, a loud sound came from the huge square where the Imperial Conference Hall was located. Thousands of yuan stones were blasted out in all directions. The entire square, along with the huge Imperial Conference Hall, were smashed by the candlelight emitted by the sun and moon candle. Torch Dragon slowly lifted his upper body and cried out, "King of East Sea, you shameless boy! Give me back my nascent divinity of 3 separations." Hundreds of figures flashed across the sky. Wu Qi had transformed into a dark shadow and quickly put the energy stones into his bag. At this moment, None of the members of Deyu's imperial clan and courtiers were in the mood to pay attention to these worldly possessions, and very few of them could recognize what the energy stones were. Wu Qi did not stand on ceremony. He put the energy stones, which contained infinite energy, into his storage ring in front of the crowd, but in fact, he stuffed them into his body and slowly refined them with the heaven-refining grand magic. The dark shadow faded, and Wu Qi appeared in front of Torch Dragon. The fiend's slaying sword formation reappeared in midair. Staring at Torch Dragon, Wu Qi said with a cold grin, "Old dragon, things have come to this. Tell me honestly, did you collude with the enemy to assassinate His Majesty?" Torch Dragon's eyes went wide, blazing with the light of the sun and moon in them, and he was about to lash out at Wu Qi. But Wu Qi suddenly let out a roar and stopped him. "You'd better think this through." Wu Qi snapped. "Don't frame others recklessly. We won't believe a word you say if you don't swear a blood oath with your natal divinity." High up in the sky, King Yangshan and the other kings of the council were shouting and cursing. They were all very surprised. Why could Torch Dragon's fleshly body suddenly move and cause so much damage to Deyu when Wu Qi had taken away his soul? When Wu Qi shouted out those two sentences, everyone shut their mouths at the same time and waited quietly for Torch Dragon's answer. Smiling proudly, Torch Dragon said in a cold voice, "How can I tell you this, boy?" As he laughed coldly, a 10 feet tall, white-bearded man and a 6 feet tall young man appeared on his forehead at the same time. Looking arrogantly at the members of Deyu's imperial clan and courtiers hovering in the sky, they said, "I know who killed Emperor Haozuan, I know who colluded with foreign enemies, and I know what the people you are worried about are trying to do to Deyu. But, do you think you can make me tell you all these things? Do you think you can do it?" Laughing wildly, Torch Dragon's body suddenly began to struggle. A deafening boom rang out as countless wounds tore open on his body at the same time. Streams of purple-black blood sprayed out of the wounds along with billowing green flames, and the surrounding sea of lava suddenly became extremely violent. Monstrous waves of lava shot up thousands of feet into the air, forcing Great Yu's subjects to fly higher in the sky. Hundreds of deafening booms rang out in a row as hundreds of dark supreme towers came slowly through the air. These supreme oracles who came to help were proficient in all kinds of mysterious ice rune spells. As soon as they arrived, they immediately activated their spells. Large patches of black snowflakes fell from the sky, and a bone-chilling cold swept out from the supreme tower. Together with the ice flame on the 136,000 bronze pillars, the cold wrapped Torch Dragon's body. Amidst a crackling noise, the sea of lava around Torch Dragon gradually solidified, and the waves of lava that soared into the sky a moment ago were frozen by a thick layer of ice. The high-temperature blood flowing out of Torch Dragon's body was frozen into purple-black ice by the cold, and his body stiffened once again. Shrill laughter rang out as both of Torch Dragon's nascent divinities burst out laughing at the same time. The young man's nascent divinity transformed into a stream of light and returned to Torch Dragon's body. Suddenly, the flame on the sun and moon torch on the dragon's head soared tenfold, and the surrounding temperature skyrocketed. The snowflakes falling from the sky melted into boiling water, the frozen lava became active again, and the thick layer of ice on Torch Dragon's body melted into a wisp of water vapor amidst the roar of the wind and fire. All the supreme oracles sitting cross-legged on the hundreds of supreme towers coughed up a mouthful of blood at the same time. They stared at the sun and moon torch in horror. They could not believe that a legendary supreme treasure of primordial was so irresistible that even the joint forces of hundreds of supreme oracles could not seal the power of a single sun and moon torch. What did Emperor Xianyuan do to imprison Torch Dragon in the palace of Deyu and force him to be the core of the formation for so many years? While these supreme oracles were still in shock, the nascent divinity of the white-bearded man standing on the dragon's head had already pulled out the golden Xianyuan sword. All the courtiers of Deyu cried out in unison, and some even fell to their knees in midair almost instinctively, worshipping the sword. Torch Dragon burst into wild laughter as he brandished the sword and cried out, "Sun and Moon Torch, Xianyuan's sword. Ha ha ha, how are you going to kill me?" His huge body slowly flew up into the sky as the chains tore at him wildly. From time to time, the sound of bones, muscles, and muscles breaking could be heard coming from his body. Torch Dragon coughed up blood because of the pain, but with the support of the enormous power of his nascent divinity, he still managed to fly up. King of East Sea, we can't let this fiend escape. We must find out from him how he murdered his majesty, cried King Yang Shan. Wu Qi answered. He let out a long roar and unleashed the fiend-slaying sword formation, which transformed into a chaotic world that enveloped Torch Dragon and himself. Princess Zhanglu, Ao Buzan, and those close to Wu Qi rushed into the chaotic world, and no one else could enter after that. Shrill dragon roars kept ringing out of the formation, but no one could see what was happening inside. Chapter 879. The fiend-slaying sword formation could use all the elements between heaven and earth to form a formation. At this moment, Wu Qi was using the vast defensive formation in Liangzhu and the endless spiritual energy caves in Yuxiong Plain as the formation. Scarlet patterns of the formation were looming in all directions. They seemed close at hand, but at the same time, they were as far away as the horizon, as if they could be touched with a stretch of their hands, but at the same time, they could not be touched even if they worked hard for a lifetime. These patterns were the specific manifestation of Liangzhu's defensive formation in the sword formation. Each pattern represented countless nested runes, and represented an enormous supply of energy. Although Torch Dragon had destroyed the Great Hall and the core of the formation, the fiend-slaying sword formation Wu Qi had constructed with 108,000 Kunwu swords had replaced the destroyed hall and become the core of Liangzhu's defensive formation again. Whether it was the great formation of Liangzhu or the fiend-slaying sword formation, they were both created by the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. Born from the same source, the two formations naturally merged seamlessly once they met. Terrible tides of energy rolled and rolled inside the formation, and soon turned into 99 mighty white torrents that stretched across heaven and earth. Each torrent was tens of thousands of miles wide, and no one could tell how long they were. Enormous amounts of energy rubbed against each other in the torrents, quickly compressing the gaseous energy into liquid, and finally condensing into a semi-solid substance like mercury. These white torrents rolled and poured over everyone's heads. Every tiny ripple in them seemed to be the incarnation of the heavenly Tao, mysterious and full of an indescribable wonderful aura. A faint purple mist could be vaguely seen in the torrents. It was the primordial purple energy released from Wu Qi's body. Entangled by it, the white torrents became more and more unfathomable. Torch Dragon coiled himself up vigilantly and stared coldly at Wu Qi and his companions, who were hovering hundreds of miles away. He sneered in a low voice and said, "The fiend-slaying sword formation. It's this damned formation again. If it weren't for this formation, how could I have been trapped here for so many years?" While Zhu Long was murmuring, again a derma-shaped purple gas rose from the top of Wu Qi's head. Yuan Ling's nether realm slowly flew out and plunged into a white torrent. When Wu Qi broke through to the Tao breaking level, he consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Even the spirit vein in Yuan Ling's dark realm was drained by Wu Qi. At the moment, Yuan Ling's nether realm was severely damaged, and he needed a large amount of natural energy to replenish it. So, which place was more suitable than Yuxiong Plain? Along with a deafening noise, 99 white torrents poured into Yuan Ling's nether realm at the same time. Originally, when Wu Qi was dealing with Torch Dragon, he did not need to use these torrents of pure spiritual energy. He was merely using the cover of the array to isolate himself from other people's eyes and ears, and using his official position for personal gain to replenish the consumption of Yuan Ling's netherworld realm. With the infusion of countless torrents of natural energy, Yuan Ling's nether realm, which looked a little lethargic, and even the innate divine tree on it had turned a little yellow, suddenly regained its vigor. A tremendous suction came from Yuan Ling's nether realm, and the 99 torrents of natural energy were transformed into beams of strong white light that plunged into Yuan Ling's nether realm. The whistling noise suddenly disappeared, and the natural energy flowed forward at high speed without making any sound. Narrowing his eyes, Torch Dragon sneered and said, "What a good scheme. Using Yuxiong Plain's natural energy for personal gain. Is this your interstitial world? Why does it look like a planet?" Wu Qi rolled his eyes at Torch Dragon and said mockingly, "You have no eyesight. This is a planet." Well, in the words of a chaos fiend god, this is a primordial mother planet, the place where my true body was born in my previous life. Torch Dragon, who did not take Wuqi seriously, was stunned. He looked up and down at Wuqi, frowned and thought for a long time, then finally shook his head and said, "Your face is unfamiliar, I can't recognize you. You must be one of the chaos fiend gods to know about the primordial mother planet, but your appearance." Wuqi rolled his eyes at Torch Dragon again and said with a sneer, "Nonsense. Of course you can't recognize me now. This is my appearance after reincarnation. Have you been locked up for too long that your brain has fossilized? I have no time for you. Ao Buzan, go and have a good time with him." A dragon roar rang out as Ao Buzan dashed out with the soul-splitting spear in his hand. As Ao Buzan strode toward Torch Dragon, his body gradually transformed into a 100 miles long, pitch-black dragon. The soul-splitting spear had also become dozens of miles long, and was held tightly in Ao Buzan's claw, its tip gleaming with a frightening cold light. At the sight of Ao Buzan's unique avatar, Torch Dragon retreated hundreds of miles in horror. Carefully, he shrunk his body to a length of 100 miles and cried out, "Ao Buzan. You're clearly the primordial ancestral dragon. I've seen you once in the primordial world. You were attacking Saintess Inghua's cave abode, you. Ao Buzan gave Torch Dragon a glare and said with a cold grin, "Oh." No wonder Lao Tzu felt that someone was spying on Lao Tzu behind his back, and had even prepared a killing move to deal with you. Stroking his chin, Ao Buzan heaved a long sigh and said, "Saintess Inghua, she has fallen as well. TSK, I spent 370 times with her, and later on, she became the dragon mother of the fire dragons. How could she have fallen?" Torch Dragon twitched his mouth and did not say a word. He glared at Ao Buzan contemptuously and spat to the side. Ao Buzan heaved a long sigh. He looked Torch Dragon up and down and said, "But you, old Torch Dragon, you and I are the two most famous dragons in Primordial, but Lao Tzu has been looking for you for many years, and he has no idea where you are hiding." "Why are you looking for me?" asked Torch Dragon subconsciously. Ao Buzan stared at Torch Dragon's lower body gloomily and murmured, "I'm looking for you to mate and give birth to babies. If you were a female dragon, Lao Tzu would have fucked you and asked you to help Lao Tzu give birth to a bunch of little dragons. But if you were a male dragon, Lao Tzu would have killed you and cut off your penis to make a tonic soup. TSK, one male dragon is enough in Primordial. Why do we need two?" Whistling in a strange tone, Ao Buzan twisted his waist and said with a strange laugh, "Haven't you heard of it? A mountain cannot accommodate two tigers, unless one is a male and the other is a female. In this world, we only need one male dragon born in Primordial, not two." "Ha ha ha, we don't need two." Torch Dragon was disgusted by Ao Buzan's words. He shuddered violently and was about to curse Ao Buzan when Ao Buzan's body suddenly shrank to the size of a loach, transformed into a beam of black light, and thrust the soul-splitting spear at Torch Dragon's lower body. Ao Buzan now had the cultivation base of a primordial immortal, and together with the attainment of the Tao in his previous life, he could unleash an astonishing strength. With a flash of black light, Torch Dragon, who was caught off guard, howled miserably. His lower body suddenly spewed out a large amount of purplish-black blood. Ao Buzan swaggered up into the air, looked at Torch Dragon, and laughed wildly. "What a pity. Just a little bit more, and there would be only one male dragon left in Primordial." Ao Buzan laughed in a strange voice. Behind him, Goldhorn and Silverhorn, the two brothers, blew shrill, unpleasant whistles and cried out, "Old dragon, castrate this fellow. That good thing will be shared among the three of us. It will be a great tonic for our yang energy." Amidst their wild laughter, Goldhorn and Silverhorn had transformed back into their true forms, transforming into dragon pythons of fire and ice that were hundreds of miles long and slowly approaching Torch Dragon. Torch Dragon's body trembled violently as he stared at Ao Buzan with an unsightly face. Just now, Ao Buzan's nearly sneak attack had nearly severed Torch Dragon's yang root. Fortunately, Torch Dragon had a profound cultivation base, so when the cold energy entered his body, he instinctively compressed his muscles and moved his yang root a little. Aobusan's spear had failed to break Torch Dragon's primordial yang root, but the spear was a chaotic spirit artifact, so its force nearly shattered Torch Dragon's body. Both of his nascent divinities were shaken violently, as if they were being cut by a wheel of countless blades. Both nascent divinities felt like they were falling apart. What a vicious weapon! With great difficulty, Torch Dragon stabilized his injuries and stared at the spear in Aobusan's hand, gnashing his teeth. Some vague memories emerged in Torch Dragon's mind. Soul-splitting spear? He asked hesitantly. No, my fleshly body would have been destroyed if it had struck me with a sneak attack. Aobusan raised the soul-splitting spear and sighed with dissatisfaction. Replica. Have you heard of that old man Yuanling? The replica he refined, the king of East Sea, is that old man's reincarnation. Damn it, such a good grand mist artifact, but the replica only has the power of a chaos spiritual artifact. What a pity, what a pity. Torch Dragon's nascent divinities had the urge to vomit blood. A replica actually has the power of a chaos spiritual artifact, and you're still not satisfied? The most powerful weapons forged by other chaos fiend gods were only at the level of innate spiritual weapons. Chaos spiritual treasures. Who could forge chaos spiritual treasures? No wonder this spear attack almost killed his fleshly body and two nascent divinities at the same time. Taking a deep breath, the sun and moon torch above Torch Dragon's head emitted a dazzling azure light that wrapped around his body. He dared not be careless anymore. Seeing that Torch Dragon had become serious, Aobusan knew that he had lost the chance to severely injure him with a sneak attack. Now, he could only fight head-on. Raising the soul-splitting spear, Aobusan began to recite an incantation in a deep voice. Large patches of dark clouds and thunderbolts emerged around Aobusan, spinning rapidly behind him and gradually turning into a huge black hole with a diameter of thousands of miles. Thick thunder dragons and lightning flood dragons spun rapidly in the black hole, stretching into a huge lightning net thousands of miles in circumference. Zhulong narrowed his eyes and struggled with all his might. However, the chains that had penetrated deep into his body had firmly imprisoned his body. There was not much space for him to move or dodge. If not for these chains, how could he have been so easily wounded by Aobusan's sneak attack just now? Blood was still dripping from the spot where his tail was pierced, and it made his mood extremely depressed. Gold Horn and Silver Horn flanked him from both sides, laughing in a deep voice as their mouths were full of saliva and flashing with ice and fire. Gnashing his teeth, Torch Dragon looked at the countless chains on his body and said in a low voice, "If not for Yellow Emperor's restrictive spell, I would have easily killed you today. Zhulong, you have just stepped into the realm of Tao reasoning, while I have been trapped for so many years, but my cultivation base has remained at the realm of Tao breaking. How could you possibly be a match for me?" Unwilling to show weakness, Aobusan grinned hideously and said, "If not for the fact that you are a male, Lao Tzu would have given you a good beating today." Humph, cut the crap. Do you think you are so great just because you are in the realm of Tao breaking? In the distance, Wu Qi chuckled. All of a sudden, 108,000 huge silver stars appeared in the void and poured down with a tremendous pressure. Torch Dragon's body sank abruptly as the pressure of these stars was exerted on him. The bones in Torch Dragon's body creaked. He struggled and jumped with all his might, but how could he move? Chapter 880. The Fiend-Slaying Sword Formation, which was supported by the enormous natural energy of the entire Yuxiong Plain, and the one without the whole Yuxiong Plain, were two very different things. One was an iron knife, and the other was a sword. An iron knife could kill as well, but it was not as clean and neat as a sword, leaving no chance for the victim to dodge. As Wu Qi's 108,000 great Daos from the kaleidoscopic star core merged with the 108,000 Kunwa swords, the endless natural energy of Yuxiong Plain condensed into 108,000 huge stars that hung high in the sky, spinning rapidly in the formation along a trajectory that seemed to have existed since ancient times and would continue to exist forever. Every time the stars rotated, the pressure on Torch Dragon increased a little. In just 3 seconds, the pressure from the formation had made many scales fall off his body, and blood oozed out from under his scales. Torch Dragon struggled madly, but apart from making his joints creak and almost dislocate, it was of no practical use. After being trapped for so many years, Torch Dragon's magic power and cultivation base had been locked at a certain critical point, which was equivalent to the strength of an almighty expert who had just stepped into the realm of Tao breaking. His nascent divinity had indeed been greatly improved by the cultivation technique of the nascent spirit of 3 separations, but because of his carelessness and some subsequent arrangements made by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, Torch Dragon boldly handed over one of his nascent divinities to Wu Qi. Torch Dragon never dreamed that Wu Qi could actually kill his nascent divinity. Although he did not know that it was Wu Qi who had devoured one of his nascent divinities, Wu Qi had killed one of them, which cost him 30% of his nascent divinity's power. Torch Dragon's current cultivation base was far weaker than Wu Qi's, and what he had the upper hand was the nascent spirit of 3 separations that he had painstakingly cultivated for so many years. With the skyrocketing power of his nascent divinity and the divine ability taught by the Buddhist League, he was even confident that he could break free from the restrictive spell set up by the Yellow Emperor and regain his freedom. But now that he had lost a third of his nascent divinity, he was only barely confident that he could break free from the Yellow Emperor's restrictive spell. But, coupled with the pressure from the fiend-slaying sword formation, Torch Dragon could no longer move. Among the remaining 2 vital spirits, the young man was controlling the movement of his corporeal body while the white-bearded man was controlling the sun and moon torch to fight against Ao Buzan. They had no more energy left and could no longer resist the attack of the sword formation. A series of explosions rang out as less than half of the Torch Dragon's scales were pulverized. The heavenly Tao represented by the 108,000 ancient stars kept attacking Zhu Long's origin souls. All kinds of illusions kept appearing before his 2 origin souls. They seemed to have gone through countless cycles of life and death in an instant. Their fighting spirit relaxed, and their origin souls became muddle-headed, unable to control themselves. Both the sun and moon torch grew dim because of the weakening of the white-bearded man's control. The thick layer of green light that wrapped around Torch Dragon was reduced to a thin and dim patch, looking like a veil in the wind that could shatter it with a casual blow. Gold Horn and Silver Horn let out a strange howl at the same time, and 2 beams of golden and silver light, each tens of miles wide, shot out. The divine light of ice and fire, the dragon python's innate divine ability, twisted and wheeled in the air like living creatures. The 2 beams of light merged into one and turned into a beam of purple light that shot toward Torch Dragon's reverse scale. After the 2 beams of light, which were tens of miles thick, merged into one, they became only as thick as a fist. However, the beam of light was extremely condensed, as if it was a long spear carved out of purple crystal. Along with an ear-piercing swishing sound, it pierced through the air. Torch Dragon's 2 origin souls roared furiously at the same time. Standing on his fleshy body, the white-bearded man waved the Xianyuan sword in his hand, getting ready to shatter the attack. But, just as he was about to strike, Princess Zhongli gave a cold snort. The avatar of the god of Scourge quietly emerged over her head, and she casually pointed out an incantation gesture at the white-bearded man. Some kind of rule power was quietly triggered, and something that should have happened to the white-bearded man in the future happened ahead of time. The blade of the Xianyuan sword fell from the hilt with a crack and plunged straight into Torch Dragon's head. The hilt in the white-bearded man's hand exploded with a boom, blowing his arm and half of his body into pieces. Bastard! The white-bearded man watched in horror as his body exploded. Purple-black mist kept spewing out of him, each of which was a drop of his soul essence and natal energy essence that he had worked so hard to accumulate for tens of thousands of years. The breaking of the fake Xianyuan sword and the explosion of the hilt should have happened only when the new Emperor Haozuan found Torch Dragon. But, Princess Zhongli's avatar of the god of Scourge had the power to bring forward all kinds of possible bad luck that existed in the future. 1 or 2 was fine, but 7 or 8 would be a real headache. And, if 10 or 20,000 bad luck happened at the same time in a short period of time, it would definitely be fatal. For example, an immortal who was struck by Princess Zhongli's curse had the cultivation base of an 18th tier gold immortal, and he would be able to step into the realm of primordial in the future. In other words, he would have to transcend 18 thunder tribulations in the future to step into the realm of primordial. The curse would trigger all 18 thunder tribulations in just a day or two, and no matter how prepared the immortal was, he would still die. This was the true face of the divine power possessed by the avatar of the god of Scourge. It could trigger the calamity in the future in advance, and then amplify the impact of the calamity as much as possible. Even as Torch Dragon's nascent divinity roared, the divine light of ice and fire unleashed by Gold Horn and Silver Horn hit the reverse scale on Torch Dragon's chest without any hindrance. The divine light of ice and fire from the soaring dragon pythons of fire and ice had an innate suppressive effect on dragons. The reverse scale on the Torch Dragon's chest was the toughest scale on his body, even 100 times tougher than his teeth. But then, with a crisp sound, a fist-sized hole appeared on the reverse scale of Torch Dragon, and an arrow of blood sprayed out from the hole. Torch Dragon's body swayed heavily. Behind the reverse scale was his heart, and there was a fist-sized hole in his heart as well. With every heartbeat, a copious amount of blood sprayed out of the hole. Torch Dragon roared and circulated his blood and energy to heal the wound in his heart, but at the same time, the bronze pillars that bound him sprayed out the ice flame of extreme Yin, which was 100 times stronger than before, and burned into his body through the chains. The blood in his veins was almost frozen into ice cubes, and his bodily functions were frozen in an instant. A pressure that was 100 times heavier than the previous one surged out from the stars in the sky. Zhulong's frozen body suddenly sank, and accompanied by an ear-piercing cracking sound, hundreds of cracks of varying lengths appeared on his body. What sprayed out of these cracks was no longer blood, but glaring black ice flame. The deafening rumble of thunder made Torch Dragon dizzy, while countless bolts of lightning that looked like shooting stars shot out of the vortex of thunderclouds behind Ao Buzan. About a mile in circumference, the thunderbolts kept exploding on Torch Dragon's body, each of which severely wounded him and turned large patches of his scales and dragon skin into ashes. All of a sudden, Torch Dragon let out an unpleasant shriek as Ao Buzan, who had transformed the soul-splitting spear into a black bolt of lightning, smashed it into Torch Dragon's waist. The soul-splitting spear easily pierced through Torch Dragon's body, then grew to hundreds of feet thick and 100 miles long, firmly pinning Torch Dragon to a large piece of black Xian Bing. Even Ao Buzan was stunned by the success of the strike. Torch Dragon, your body is weak. Hee, this is not the body that a living being in the primordial should have. Torch Dragon's performance today was far less than Ao Buzan had expected. The power of his fleshly body was pitifully weak. Torch Dragon threw his head back and roared furiously, if the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan had not imprisoned me for so many years, causing my fleshly body to turn stiff and petrified, how could I have let you succeed so easily? Hate. Laughing bitterly, Torch Dragon snapped, well, what's the use of this fleshly body of mine? In the future, I'll change my appearance and no longer have the body of Torch Dragon. At that time, there will be a new world in front of me, so why should I linger in this body of a wolf? A golden lotus throne floated out of Torch Dragon's forehead. Accompanied by a deep and sonorous chanting, two of his nascent divinities flew up into the sky. The golden lotus throne emitted a faint Buddhist light, and wherever it passed, the enormous pressure gathered by Wu Qi with the sword formation could no longer do anything to Torch Dragon. The huge sun and moon torch flew up along with the lotus throne, emitting a faint green light that wrapped around the lotus throne. Torch Dragon's heavy and huge body fell heavily to the ground. Ao Buzan, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, Silver Feather, and Catfish Flood Dragon flew toward it. Lord Xianqing thrust his illusion-breaking halberd straight at the lotus throne, Yuan Qing leaped up and hacked at Torch Dragon's nascent divinity with his staff, while Little K, and Feng Tianling opened their mouths and sprayed out two streams of Nanming flame to burn it. The golden lotus throne swayed gently, and a vast Buddhist light poured out of it. All the attacks were turned into nothingness when they were still far away from Torch Dragon's nascent divinity. Lord Xiansheng and the others cried out in alarm as they were knocked back in a sorry state. Wu Qi's eyes lit up as he looked at the lotus throne and said with a smile, "What a great treasure." Torch Dragon's two nascent divinities glared at Wu Qi and said with a cold grin, "It is indeed a great treasure." It is transformed from one of the petals of Lord Buddha's 8 treasures lotus throne, a supreme treasure of the Buddhist League that can defend oneself and the enemy. How could you? Heaven! The complacent torch dragon was suddenly struck dumb. Right in front of him, Wuqi's body had transformed into the 4-faced and 6-armed golden body of the Buddha. A beam of Buddhist light shot out of Wuqi's eyes and gently swept across the golden lotus throne. The great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture was exercised, and the golden lotus throne obediently fell into Wuqi's hand. Torch Dragon's nascent divinity let out a shrill cry. A great sheet of green light burst out of the sun and moon torch, and was about to flee with the 2 nascent divinities. But suddenly, countless stars in the void shone brightly, transforming into countless silver flying swords that slashed down toward the torch. A column of green flame, 10,000 miles in circumference, rushed out of the torch and greeted the flying swords. Wuqi let out a long cry and thrust the heaven-pacifying sword down. With a shake of his hand, Ao Buzan produced the soul-splitting spear, while Lord Xianqian produced the illusion-breaking halberd. Meanwhile, Princess Zhanglu struck out the indestructible lotus, the fundamental pagoda, and the heart seal in quick succession. 5 beams of strong light froze the earth, water, fire, and wind, as well as the green flames spewed out by the sun and moon torch. Even though 5 chaos spiritual artifacts were not a match for a grand mist artifact, the sun and moon torch's azure flames were suppressed to the point that they were a beat slower than the sun and moon torch. It was during that moment of delay that countless sword beams enveloped Torch Dragon's nascent divinity and shredded the remaining 2 nascent divinities of his 3 separations nascent divinities into pieces. The thievery energy was unleashed, silently absorbing all the natal energy essence released by Torch Dragon's 3 separations nascent divinity. Sensing the destruction of his nascent divinity, Torch Dragon's stiff body suddenly let out a long hiss as blood sprayed out of it. The ancient god, Torch Dragon, had fallen completely. Chapter 881. Suddenly, Wuqi raised his hand and said in a deep voice, "Heaven and earth have sensed it. I dare not take all the credit." Unfortunately, the world had changed. For some reason, Torch Dragon had offended the sacred emperor of the human race, and was imprisoned into Yu by the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan with such a powerful restrictive spell. His strong fleshly body, which was even stronger than the great Saint Pangu's, had decayed to such an extent. It seemed that his fleshly body was at most at the level of a primordial immortal, at least tens of thousands of times weaker than when he was at his peak. Meanwhile, the Yuan divinities of the 2 corpses were besieged by the crowd. After all, they were just Yuan divinities, which could not compare to the fighting strength of a fleshly body. Even the Yuan divinities of chaos fiend gods were extremely fragile compared to their fleshly bodies. After a fierce battle, Torch Dragon's Yuan divinity was severely wounded, and he could only escape with the help of the golden lotus throne given by Amitabha. While Wuqi remained silent, King Li Shan, whose face was also extremely unsightly, snapped, "You are right, eldest brother. King of East Sea, hand over the wheel of sun and moon at once." Before Wuqi could say anything, King Li Shan had already leaped toward the wheel of sun and moon, grabbing at the trembling supreme treasure of primal that was trying to break free from Wuqi's restraint. Torch Dragon's teeth, bones, skin, and scales were all excellent materials for artifact refinement. If Wuqi were to carefully refine it, he would definitely be able to refine many innate spirit artifacts. Many important figures in the East Sea would also be able to upgrade their weapons and armors to a higher level. Sneering, Wuqi murmured, "A supreme treasure of primal. Are you trying to snatch my food?" Torch Dragon's blood was also an excellent material for alchemy. When Wuqi saw Ao Buzan and the others trampling on Torch Dragon's corpse, he hurriedly flew over, grabbed a large jade bottle, and began to extract Torch Dragon's blood. The blood in Torch Dragon's huge body was comparable to the water in dozens of great rivers. It took Wuqi a while to extract all the blood. In the face of the might of heaven and earth, only Tao-breaking experts could just barely resist it. Torch Dragon's true body was hundreds of thousands of miles long, and his tendon was also hundreds of thousands of miles long. Although his body had decayed after being imprisoned for so many years, the tendon still contained most of his essence. If such a long dragon tendon was used to forge weapons, how many powerful bows could the East Sea increase? This was especially true for generals like Bai Qi and Li Xian. As generals, didn't they all need a powerful bow? If it was any other Buddha who gave him a life-saving magic treasure, Wu Qi might have to spend some effort. However, it was the golden lotus throne given by Amitabha. Wu Qi didn't even need to spend any effort to swallow the golden lotus throne, which also devoured his primordial spirit. Looking at Torch Dragon's corpse lying on the ground, Wu Qi could not help but shake his head. Torch Dragon's dying howl shook the tens of thousands of stars in the void, and the fiend's slaying sword formation shook violently. As all of Wu Qi's mind was connected with the sword formation, when the sword formation moved, his body was affected as well, causing him to tremble a few times. Even his divine soul was shaken by the aftershock of the sword formation. But, as he had just devoured Torch Dragon's primordial spirit of 3 separations, his divine soul and cultivation base had skyrocketed several times, the tremors could no longer hurt him. With a crooked finger, a stream of yellow energy poured into Huang Liang's body. Huang Liang, whose cultivation base had reached the peak of the 9 stars realm of the second Pangu heaven with the true body of heaven and earth scripture, gave a strange cry, "I'm going to explode." Assassinating a human emperor was a heaven-defying act, so Torch Dragon had accumulated a great amount of karma. If the golden lotus throne given by Amitabha had not helped him suppress it, he would have been exposed. When Wu Qi and his companions killed Torch Dragon, the heavenly Tao sensed it and immediately sent down an immeasurable amount of virtues, which was enough for the most important civil and military officials of the 6 states to make breakthroughs. It was a pleasant surprise. Wu Qi's eyes flickered. Just as he was about to discuss what to say, King Xian Shan, whose face had turned extremely unsightly, suddenly snapped, "King of East Sea, Torch Dragon has been killed. Hand over his natal magical artifact, the Sun and Moon Torch. This is the supreme artifact of Primal. How can you, a mere king of East Sea, lay a finger on it?" When all this was done, the pressure of the heavenly Tao slowly dissipated, and King Yang Shan and the others regained their ability to move. How infuriating! King Gu Shan, who was standing next to King Yang Shan, widened his eyes and fainted with anger. His personal guards and subordinates were so frightened that they rushed forward to treat him, giving him all kinds of life-saving pills as if they were free. Although Bai Qi and the other military officials had changed their cultivation of the true body of heaven and earth scripture, which Wu Qi had used to disguise their appearances, Su Qin and the others were practicing the magic of immortals. If Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu had not worked together to conceal their auras with the talismans made of primal violet energy, King Yang Shan and the others would have long discovered that something was wrong with Su Qin and the others. But now that they were about to break through the realm of primordial with the strong push of the heavenly Tao, even the talismans made of primal violet energy could not conceal their auras. So, Wu Qi had no choice but to send them all into his interstitial world to make the breakthrough. Accompanied by a melodious sound, an immeasurable amount of virtue fell from the sky and quickly fell toward Wu Qi, Ao Buzan, and the others. All those who had participated in the attack on Torch Dragon had received a huge amount of virtue at the moment, especially Wu Qi, who had devoured Torch Dragon's 3 nascent divinities and caused his death. The virtue poured down like a great river, and a vast amount of golden energy came whistling over, giving off a feeling that heaven and earth were collapsing and that the chaotic airflow from the outer heavenly realms had rushed into this world. It was obviously the virtue of heaven and earth, but it came with a threatening power that seemed to destroy everything. The vast amount of virtue formed into a golden halo of virtue behind Huang Liang's head. His body made a loud cracking noise as the Pangu's sacred energy traveled wantonly through his meridians, opening up all his meridians, acupoints, joints, and fascia. Hot currents surged madly through Huang Liang's body like burning mercury. 2 beams of fierce purple light shot out of Huang Liang's eyes as he broke through the bottleneck of the realm of Pangu heaven and stepped into the 1-star realm of Hongmeng Pangu heaven. Throwing Huang Liang aside, Wu Qi made a grabbing motion with both hands. Li Mu, Lian Pe, Bai Qi, Li Xian, Wang Jian, and the other famous generals of the 6 states, as well as Su Qin, Zhang Yi, Gigu, Zi, Sun Kuang, Mod, and the other ministers of the 6 states. An enormous amount of virtue divided into hundreds of billowing torrents and poured into their bodies. Then, Wu Qi activated his Dark Yin celestial tower and swallowed all Su Qin and the others, who were practicing immortal cultivation, into it. Blood oozed out of Wu Qi's 7 orifices as he forcibly resisted the virtue that had descended from heaven and earth and poured it into the bodies of others. It was like a child trying to turn a huge millstone. Both Wu Qi's body and divine soul were under great pressure. When Wu Qi, who had just created Huang Liang, was almost unable to resist the counterattack of the heavenly Tao, Princess Zhang pressed her hands on Wu Qi's back and poured an enormous divine power into him. A 5-colored divine light roared up from the top of Wu Qi's head. In front of so many ministers of Diyu, Wu Qi flew to King Li Shan and kicked him away. The faces of the ministers of Diyu who were hovering in midair turned extremely unsightly when they thought of the beautiful imperial gardens not long ago, and then looked at the huge rock that was now barren. The huge rock was like a heavy slap in the face of all the ministers of Diyu. The faces of King Yang Shan and the other kings of the council turned green, then white, then blue, and then blue. Suddenly, a few of the grumpy kings could not control the surging of their energy and blood, causing them to open their mouths and cough up large mouthfuls of hot blood. Torch Dragon's huge body fell to the ground, and Ao Buzan and his men were still devouring his flesh and blood. Everyone present knew that Torch Dragon was dead even without Wu Qi telling them. King Yang Shan growled furiously, "Who else is the murderer besides Torch Dragon?" Wu Qi was taken aback. He squinted at King Xian Shan and thought, "You're so quick to react and start to muddy the waters. You're pretty smart." As Wu Qi raised his hand, the boundless virtues falling from the sky suddenly froze. Not only Wu Qi, but even Ao Buzan and the others did not get any of them. Wu Qi reached out and grabbed at the void. Huang Liang, who was hovering in midair and unable to move, let out a strange cry as Wu Qi grabbed him. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi suddenly burst out laughing. With a wave of his hand, 108,000 Kunwu swords quickly disappeared into his body, and the fiend-slaying sword formation was unraveled, revealing the blue sky outside. Torch Dragon had been killed, and the sun and moon torch was forcibly imprisoned in midair by Wu Qi with a restrictive spell. The torch no longer emitted its scorching blue light, and the imperial palace of Diyu, which had been burned into a sea of lava, had solidified into a huge, flat rock. "Torch Dragon has been killed," cried out Wu Qi in a deep voice. He confessed that he was the one who attacked and assassinated His Majesty. After all this was done, there was still more than half of the virtues in the void that had not been consumed. Wu Qi opened his mouth and inhaled deeply, sucking all the black-yellow energy that filled the sky into his mouth. Some of it was poured into the bodies of Xiangyu and Huhai, who were cultivating in the interstitial world, and the rest was stored in the magical artifact he had condensed with the primal purple energy. The energy of virtues was an essential material when crafting powerful magical artifacts. Billowing purple clouds gathered over everyone's heads and swirled rapidly. With the imperial palace of Diyu as the center, a whirlpool of clouds formed by 9 layers of purple clouds blanketed the entire sky. 9 layers of light barriers wheeled rapidly in the sky, producing a dull rumble as purple light poured down from the sky, turning the entire Yuxiong plain a deep purple. In the void, billowing purple clouds rushed over from all directions. No one could tell how long they were, but each of them was hundreds of miles thick, and as they rushed forward, thunderous rumbles could be heard. The tremendous pressure of heaven and earth froze everyone in midair, and only Wu Qi and Princess Zhang could move their fingers. In the chaotic world before Pangu created the world, Torch Dragon was a very famous almighty expert. When he opened his eyes, the world would be shrouded in bright light, and when he closed his eyes, the chaos would be plunged into darkness. At that time, Torch Dragon was said to be the most promising existence to break through all restraints and gain true freedom and power. Compared to Ao Buzan, the lascivious dragon, Torch Dragon had a very high reputation, enough to rank in the top 10 among all the Chaos Fiend gods. What a pity! After all, he was a famous almighty expert in the chaos. His reputation is much higher than mine in my previous life. What a pity! How could he end up like this? Looking at Ao Buzan and his company, who were holding Torch Dragon's corpse and chewing on it, Wu Qi cried out hastily, "Just eat the meat. Keep his teeth, bones, skin, scales, and tendons, and give them to Supremacy 3 Flame so that he can craft items." Just as he drew out Torch Dragon's blood, Wu Qi suddenly sensed that something was changing rapidly in the void. As for the power of his nascent divinity, it was much stronger than before, which was why he could forcibly break through the restrictive spells cast by the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan with his fleshly body. Unfortunately, as he was cultivating the nascent divinity of 3 separations, he had foolishly sent one of his nascent divinities to Wu Qi, who did not play by the rules and easily devoured his nascent divinity. Chapter 882. After cultivating both the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the dragon transformation script, after Wu Qi broke into the realm of Tao breaking, his fleshly body could no longer be described with a normal concept. But, in general, he could break and resist all spells with his fleshly body. After that, Wu Qi regained the memories of his previous life. He refined his body with the heaven refining cauldron, fused the true body of heaven and earth scripture, the dragon transformation script, and the dragon kill into the heaven refining grand magic, and nourished his fleshly body with the primal purple energy and Yuan Ling's pure energy. As a result, his fleshly body was countless times stronger than when he was cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the dragon transformation script. The true body of heaven and earth scripture was created by some almighty experts of the human race based on the Pangu true body of heaven and earth scripture. When cultivated to the extreme, one's fleshly body could reach 40 to 50% of Pangu's strength. However, the heaven refining grand magic was a cultivation technique created by Yuan Ling, whose fleshly body was much stronger than Pangu's. Therefore, at the moment, Wu Qi's fleshly body was beyond the imagination of others. He casually kicked on King Li Shan's belly. Along with a few popping noises, King Li Shan's intestines were ripped open, and a clear footprint was left on his back. A mouthful of warm blood mixed with some strange yellow and green liquid sprayed out of his mouth. Holding his belly with both hands, King Li Shan fainted without even making a sound. A few of King Li Shan's trusted generals roared, pulled out their swords, and hacked at Wu Qi. Wu Qi looked coldly at these generals, who were at the peak of the second Panga heaven, and let them hack and slash at him with their weapons. Wu Qi was still a little afraid of the oracles of Deyu. After all, Deyu had been passed down for so many years, and only God knew if they had any vicious spells that could hurt Tao-breaking experts. But, Wu Qi completely ignored the generals of Deyu, who fought purely with brute force. The long swords hacked on Wu Qi's body and generated a series of ear-piercing clangs. The long swords broke inch by inch, and the perlicues of those commanders were shattered. Blood spurted out from the hilts of the swords. Before these captains could cry out in alarm, Wu Qi leaped up and gave them a slap on the face. 8 captains howled miserably as they were sent flying away, half of their cheeks and facial bones smashed to a pulp. It looked as if half of their heads were blown away by Wu Qi. The injury was not fatal, but it was very frightening. While Wu Qi was fighting to his heart's content, Huang Liang, who was the first to be infused with a large amount of merit points, had already broken through and woken up. When human generals broke through the Hongmeng Panga heaven, they didn't need to understand the laws of heaven and earth, nor did they need to go through the 3 calamities and 4 tribulations. In short, their physical strength would skyrocket. Seeing that someone dared to attack Wu Qi, Huang Liang, who considered himself the most loyal and capable general under Wu Qi's command, roared and leaped forward. While the few generals who were knocked flying away by Wu Qi were still flying in the air, Huang Liang had already arrived next to them, leaving a trail of afterimages behind him, and quickly twisted their necks. When Huang Liang of Hongmeng Panga Heaven bullied these generals, it was like a primordial immortal beating an ordinary gold immortal, as easy as a mortal crushing an ant. After killing a few of King Li Shan's trusted generals, Huang Liang, who felt his body was brimming with energy and endless strength, cried out, "Who dares to be rude to my king? Step forward and let me have a good look at you." With a snort, Huang Liang flexed his arms coquettishly to show off his well-developed muscles. A crisp sound rang out as the armor on his upper body was shattered by his bulging muscles, and all his clothes turned to ashes and drifted away in the wind. With his upper body bare, Huang Liang stared blankly at the speechless ministers of Diyu, then slowly bowed his head and scurried back behind Wu Qi. Deep and powerful breaths rang out as Bai Qi and the others broke through their realms one by one. Feeling the endless power in their bodies, they stood behind Wu Qi at the same time. Dozens of the most elite generals of the 6 states unleashed their killing intent, which had been cultivated on the battlefield for a long time. The fierce killing intent made the generals under King Li Shan not dare to attack recklessly. King Yang Shan looked at Bai Qi and the others behind Wu Qi with a bright gleam in his eyes, and he was shocked. He was shocked in his heart. Since when did Wu Qi have such a group of wonderful generals around him? Unlike Huang Liang, who was born and raised in Diyu, Bai Qi and the others had an air of majesty that was almost comparable to King Yang Shan's, and they should have a very different air from the other generals of Diyu. It was as if an antelope had appeared in a flock of sheep, and the temperament and bearing they exuded could not be concealed. King Yang Shan studied Bai Qi and the others curiously. But long before they came to Liangzhu, Wu Qi had used a technique in the scroll of stealing to help Bai Qi and the others change their appearances. They did not change much, except that the corners of their eyes were a little higher, the corners of their lips a little longer, the bridge of their noses a little lower, the thickness of their eyebrows a little thicker, and the angle of their chins a little higher. Although the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states were personally sent to Myriad Immortals planet by King Yang Shan, he could not recognize the origin of Bai Qi and the others. First, Wu Qi had changed their appearances. Second, King Yang Shan did not take Bai Qi and the others too seriously in those years, thinking that they were nothing more than pawns or tools. Who would seriously remember their faces? Wu Qi had removed the black celestial forbidden curse on Bai Qi and the others, so King Yang Shan could not sense the unique aura emanating from them. Naturally, he did not suspect who Bai Qi and the others were. Now, with the help of the enormous virtue of the heavenly Tao, Wu Qi had forcibly helped Bai Qi and the other generals of the 6 states break through the overall strength of the 3rd Panga heaven. Together with Ao Buzan and the others, who were crazily devouring Torch Dragon's flesh and blood, the overall strength Wu Qi was showing now was very strong. Although Wu Qi's foundation was still a little weak compared to Diyu and the other powerful clans, he had the Kunwa sword, which made him the successor of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. Coupled with the dozens of primordial experts under his command, who would dare to attack him? King Xian Shan glanced at King Li Shan, whose life was uncertain after being kicked by Wu Qi. His expression flickered for a while, and then he suddenly snapped, "King of East Sea, why did you hurt Prince Diyu so badly? Could it be that you want to rebel by relying on the meager strength behind you?" Raising his right hand, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "I swear on my soul that I will never rebel." King Xian Shan opened his mouth, but his face turned purple when he heard Wu Qi's sudden oath. Gnashing his teeth, he breathed out a sigh of relief and snapped, "Then why don't you hand over the sun and moon torch now?" What are you trying to do?" Wu Qi looked at King Xian Shan in surprise and asked calmly, "Why do you have to target me, King Xian Shan? Are you afraid that I'll tell you?" Before Wu Qi could finish, King Xian Shan growled angrily, "How dare you? Do you think I'm afraid of you?" King Yang Shan and the other kings of the council turned to look at King Xian Shan at the same time. Their eyes flickered with an indescribable sense of danger. "Calm down, King Xian Shan," said King Yin Shan grimly. "If you have anything to say, just let the King of East Sea say it." Clearing his throat, King Yin Shan said, "I can't believe the heavenly Tao has bestowed such a great virtue upon the King of East Sea for killing Torch Dragon. I've only heard that the human emperor is the person entrusted with the destiny of the heavenly Tao. If someone dares to kill the human emperor without permission, he or she will surely be plagued by boundless bad karma. Killing someone with boundless bad karma will surely result in boundless good karma." King Gu Shan, who had just woken up, gritted his teeth and said with a cold grin, "Please tell us, King of East Sea, who colluded with Torch Dragon to kill His Majesty." All the kings of the council turned to look at King Xian Shan. King Xian Shan's expression remained unchanged, but beads of cold sweat kept breaking out of his back. He stared fixedly at the sun and moon torch hovering next to Wu Qi, his eyes flickering. No one knew what he was thinking. Wu Qi patted the torch and said coolly, "This treasure was seized by me, so it naturally belongs to me." King Yangshan nodded and said, "That makes sense. The sun and moon torch was seized by the king of East Sea, so it naturally belongs to the king of East Sea." As he said this, King Yangshan was quite pleased with himself. Wu Qi was his trusted aide, and if Wu Qi's strength grew stronger, didn't that mean King Yangshan's power grew stronger as well? Besides, if a supreme artifact of primal like the sun and moon torch fell into King Yangshan's hands, who knew how many people would plot against him? So, instead of having it in his hands, he might as well give it to Wu Qi. As for the other kings of the council, since King Yangshan could not get such a precious treasure, they had better not dream about it. After quickly deciding the ownership of the sun and moon torch, King Yangshan asked in a deep voice, "King of East Sea, do you have any definite clues about the assassination of His Majesty?" Wu Qi nodded slowly. He told King Xianshan all the clues he had obtained through torture in God's prison, and then laid out the evidence he had obtained from Torch Dragon's soul. The imperial edict to pass the throne to King Yangshan was forged with the purpose of throwing Diyu into chaos. I've learned all about how the imperial edict was forged. But, except for a few of the masterminds, everyone else has been silenced. King Xianshan rudely interrupted Wu Qi. Silenced? How to silence them? How did you do that in the palace of Diyu? Wu Qi looked coldly at King Xianshan and said in a flat voice, "It was your highness who killed the imperial guards in front of the Great Hall that night with the help of Buddha Soul, a traitor of the Buddhist League, and then had their bodies eaten by Torch Dragon to destroy the evidence. Why are you asking me how I killed them?" King Xianshan burst out laughing. He pointed at Wu Qi and snapped, "King of East Sea, you're slandering me. You're just slandering me because I've taken a fancy to the sun and moon torch. How could you?" Wu Qi grabbed the torch and threw it to King Xianshan. "I don't want it anymore," he said coolly. "You can have it." Without even looking at the stunned King Xianshan, Wu Qi turned to King Yangshan and the other kings of the council and said with a cold smile, "King Xianshan and King Lishan colluded with the Buddhist League, lured Buddha's soul into the palace, and killed His Majesty with the help of Torch Dragon. When His Majesty ascended the throne, the great oracle of the Directorate of Celestials said that His Majesty would be killed by his own son. May I ask if your highness is aware of this?" Before Wu Qi's voice could fade away, King Xianshan had already pressed his palm against the torch and roared, "Kings, you're plotting a rebellion against the throne of Diyu. All soldiers of the Flying Bear Army, listen up. Kill the army of East Sea and catch all the rebels in one fell swoop." Grabbing the torch, King Xianshan led the tens of thousands of civil and military officials behind him and sped toward the exit of the palace. The ground was shaking faintly, and battle cries could be heard coming from all directions. Led by King Xianshan's trusted generals, the newly formed Flying Bear Army, which was less than 2 years old, had turned out in full strength and was heading straight for Liangzhu. The main camp of the Flying Bear Army was located in Liangzhu, and countless soldiers had already rushed out to attack the mansions of the kings of the council. Chapter 883. Just as King Xianshan ordered the Flying Bear Army to attack and took the lead in fleeing toward the palace gate, the courtiers behind him also made their move. There were about 300,000 courtiers and generals in Liangzhu who could discuss state affairs in the Great Hall, and King Xianshan's supporters numbered more than 30,000. Now that these people had made their move, the scene was thrown into chaos. Just now, Torch Dragon had wreaked havoc in the palace, and all the courtiers were wounded, so their reactions were much slower. As soon as King Xianshan roared, his supporters immediately attacked the people around him. Blades and swords danced wildly in the sky as the tens of thousands of courtiers behind King Xianshan pulled out countless spirit talismans and threw them out at the same time. Flames and thunderbolts turned into thick clouds that almost blotted out the sky. The cultivation bases of these courtiers of Diyu were not much different. Apart from King Yangshan and those who had strong clans and lineages, the others were about the same level as gold immortals. When they were suddenly attacked, miserable howls rang out and blood splattered in all directions. Many died and fell to the ground. The generals behind King Xian Shan swung their blades and swords around like mad tigers. Their bodies were surrounded by a thin layer of golden light, which increased their strength by dozens of times. For a moment, they had an absolute upper hand over the other courtiers around them. Wherever the blades and swords passed, heads flew into the air. When the spears pierced through the air, blood sprayed everywhere, and some of the generals pulled out small crossbows made with secret techniques and fired wildly. Dense rune arrows flew through the air, and those who were hit by the arrows howled and fell to the ground. The spirit talismans in the hands of the courtiers were very strange as well. Although they were in essence the bone talismans of Dayu's Directorate of Celestials, the power they unleashed when activated was more like the large-scale magic spells of immortals and Buddhas. The dull rumbling of thunder made one's bones and tendons go limp. Thunder and fire swept across heaven and earth, and with each rumble of thunder, hundreds of courtiers fell to the ground, howling. Caught off guard by King Xian Shan's confidence, Dayu's courtiers were thrown into confusion. King Xian Shan grabbed the torch and fled in a panic, while the courtiers who had killed him followed him out of the palace. But when they fled, they followed a strict battle formation, leaving behind people to intercept the pursuers and throwing out a large number of spirit talismans, making it impossible for King Yang Shan and the others to catch up. Seeing that King Xian Shan and the others were about to escape from the palace, a group of Flying Bear Army soldiers were charging toward the palace's main gate with a ferocious aura. If they were to join forces, it would be a little impossible to stop King Xian Shan. Stop them! What are you doing? King Yang Shan snapped. King Yang Shan roared at the hundreds of supreme oracles in the sky who had come as reinforcements during Torch Dragon's rampage. These supreme oracles all practiced the Xian Bing talisman art of extreme yin. If they were to make a move, it would be easy for them to block the entrance of the palace and prevent King Xian Shan from escaping. But, these oracles just stared at each other in the sky, and none of them dared to move rashly. Only when King Yang Shan was cursing did these oracles slowly drive the supreme towers to cross each other in the sky, slowly dividing them into two distinct formations. Tremendous divine wills surged in the void. Hundreds of supreme oracles locked onto and attacked each other with their divine wills, stirring up a spiritual storm that shook all the civil and military officials in the sky. Blood oozed out of their 7 apertures and fell to the ground, while the civil and military officials cursed and held their heads in their hands, seeming to be having a hard time. The roars of beasts rang out incessantly, while blasts of various colors rushed out of the heads of King Yang Shan and the other kings of the council, as well as the honorable courtiers, as tens of thousands of powerful beast souls emerged out of thin air. With the help of the soul power of these beast souls, King Yang Shan and the others managed to keep their minds clear under the attacks of the 2 supreme oracles. Wu Qi let out a long roar. A plume of black smoke sprayed out of the top of his head, while the soul of Tao Tai flew up with bared fangs and brandished claws. Standing swaggeringly next to Princess Xianglu, he cried out, "Anyone from the East Sea who dares to invade our camp will be killed without mercy." One after another, Huang Liang and the other military officers of the East Sea rushed toward the East Sea's camps outside the 4 city gates of Liangzhu. But, when they were less than 1,000 feet away, the dozens of supreme oracles standing at the exit of the palace waved their hands at the same time. A great sheet of cold light fell from the sky like a wall, and the frigid air condensed into countless black Xian Bing walls, each about an inch thick, in the air, blocking in front of Huang Liang and the others. After paying his respects to the supreme oracles, Huang Liang swung his broadsword and brought it down hard on one of the Xian Bing walls in front of him. A strange noise rang out as Huang Liang's broadsword and the Xian Bing wall shattered at the same time. Huang Liang's body trembled, and a thin layer of ice suddenly formed on his fingers. "It's so cold. Damn it! How can these old fools be so strong?" he cried out. Princess Xianglu gave a clear cry. 9 golden bodies of the ancient gods emerged from the top of her head amidst a 5-colored divine light, and streams of divine power swept out in all directions. "Ignore them," Princess Xianglu cried out, "just do what you need to do." She waved her hand, and a large sheet of light fell on Huang Liang, Baiqi, Lian Pe, and the other East Sea military officers. Their bodies were wrapped in a faint layer of five-colored light, and the Xian Bing wall in front of them suddenly evaporated. Huang Liang and the others let out a long cry, then quickly turned into numerous afterimages and rushed toward the East Sea military camps outside the city gates. A few supreme oracles snorted coldly. Driving their supreme towers, they were about to press toward Princess Xianglu. Wu Qi gave a long cry, and the 108 Kunwu swords shot out, rolling up the rich natural energy in the surroundings and activating the defensive formation of Liangzhu. Soon, numerous runes of the formation lit up on the ground outside the city, and a vast amount of natural energy quickly gathered toward the Kunwu swords. Wu Qi's body trembled violently as all the natural energy in the whole Yuxiong plain seemed to be converging toward him, giving him a sense of powerlessness that he could not control. The past human emperors were able to control this array formation because they borrowed the power of the array formation in the hall to share the power of the array formation's backlash. In particular, Torch Dragon, a scapegoat, was suppressed under the hall. Torch Dragon's huge body and strong body became the array formation's cushion, so the human emperors could easily control this array formation with their Tao reasoning realm strength. But, without Torch Dragon's cushion, even though Wu Qi had just stepped into the realm of Tao breaking, he felt that his body was about to be torn apart by the enormous natural energy. If it were not for the heaven-refining grand magic, and Wu Qi's extremely tough body, he would have been blown to pieces by now. With a wry smile, Wu Qi reluctantly pointed at the formation and cried out, "King Xian Shan, order your soldiers to return to their barracks. You, and the traitors who followed you and betrayed to you, surrender now, or damn it, or Lao Tzu will kill you all." By exercising the Dharma idol divine ability, his body had grown to a height of 100,000 feet. Blue veins and blood vessels bulged all over his body, twisting and throbbing like flood dragons. An enormous amount of energy kept pouring into his body through Kunwu swords. With the help of the formation, his overall strength soared, and soon reached the level of peak-level Tao-breaking realm that Emperor Haozuan had achieved with the help of the formation. The peak level of Tao-breaking realm had the power to shatter almost all the shackles of the heavenly Tao. Wu Qi's eyes flickered with purple flames. He felt that he had returned to the peak of the Tao-breaking realm in his previous life, when he could easily crush everything in front of him. Glaring furiously at the supreme oracles who had just stopped Huang Liang and others, he cried out lightly, "Die." The oracles' bodies exploded with a boom, their bones and flesh turning into mud and their souls dispersing. Sure enough, they were all dead. Wu Qi pointed out a finger, and the supreme towers they were riding crashed to the ground. Then, Princess Zhongli's five-colored divine ray swept across them, and they disappeared without a trace. King of East Sea, kill all the traitors. Except for the ringleaders, King Xian Shan and King Li Shan, kill all the others. King Yang Shan cried out. Understood. Wu Qi cried out in a deep voice. With a thought in Wu Qi's mind, countless silver-purple stars appeared in the sky above the formation. The huge stars spun violently and shot out countless fist-sized silver starlight with sharp edges. The starlight fell to the ground like shooting stars, and each star accurately hit the head of a rebellious soldier of the Flying Bear Army. The starlight was extremely heavy and sharp. Even though the soldiers of the Flying Bear Army had profound cultivation bases and strong fleshly bodies, they were killed in an instant by the starlight. There were only dead soldiers, and none of them were wounded. Wu Qi's body was shrouded in a thick and heavy vortex of energy, making his enormous body look like a fiend. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes flashed like lightning. His whole body and divine soul had become one with the formation in Liangzhu. He felt that he had never been in such a good state. In the area covered by the formation, except for the secret palace, which was protected by countless restrictive spells, he could control almost everything. King Xian Shan, stop now, or you'll die. While no one was paying attention, Wu Qi stealthily fused the immeasurable amount of energy gathered by the formation into the heaven-refining cauldron between his eyebrows. The cauldron was an extraordinary artifact of the primal chaos. Although it did not have any offensive or defensive power, it had a miraculous effect. It was much stronger than Wu Qi, and no matter how much energy he poured into it, it did not react. Wu Qi took the opportunity to steal more energy, as he would need the cauldron's help when he cultivated the heaven-refining grand magic in the future. King Xian Shan, sweating profusely, turned around and pointed a finger at Wu Qi. He did not even have the strength to curse him. Even Emperor Haozuan dared not to let all the energy in the formation flow directly into his body. It had to be buffered by Torch Dragon and the formation before he could use the whole formation. Wu Qi is a freak. He actually used his own power as the core of the formation to control this supreme-grade killing formation. Anyone who controlled this formation would have the overall strength of a peak-level Dao-breaking expert. In Diyu today, no one could fight against the person who controlled this formation. King Xian Shan stared at Wu Qi in despair, then suddenly roared, "Buddha soul, you bastard! Haven't you succeeded yet? You. It's been so many days, you bastard." While King Xian Shan's curses were still echoing in the air, a hoarse, deep, and evil voice of Buddha came from a distance. "I am a Buddha, and the Buddha is merciful. I never thought that apart from Emperor Haozuan, after destroying Yu Xiong Palace, there is someone who can withstand the backlash of this formation with his fleshly body." The voice sighed and said slowly, "Listen up, kings of Dayu's council. I've taken control of the Temple of Truth, and the life and death of all your revered elders are now in my hands. Can we have a good talk now?" Hee. Buddha's soul laughed in a strange voice, while King Yang Shan and the others looked in the direction of the secret palace with ashen faces. King Xian Shan raised his hands and cheered, while his followers around him screamed with excitement. Only those who were truly loyal to Diyu could not help but tremble and wail in despair. Chapter 884. The human race on Pangu continent attached great importance to the transmigration of life and death. They believed in the principle of transmigration. When a person was born, it was the gift of heaven and earth, the creation of nature. They lived and multiplied on Pangu continent, but in the end, they would all return to the earth. Everything of a human came from nature, and when the life of nature came to an end, it was natural for a human to give everything back to nature. Therefore, the people of Diyu, including the human emperors, were buried directly after their deaths, and there were no coffins of gold and jade or tall imperial tombs. Even the bodies of the human emperors would be mixed with the soil of Pangu continent. Therefore, the humans of Diyu attached great importance to the worship of the souls of their ancestors, and did not have the custom of sweeping the tombs. Among all the humans of Diyu, those generals and oracles with profound cultivation bases were entitled to a certain amount of natural spirit items to prolong their lives. But, the number of natural spirit items was limited, and their effects were limited. At most, like Emperor Haozuan, he could only prolong his life by 3 eons with the support of an entire dynasty. As for the other princes and others, they could only prolong their lives by dozens of periods at most, and that was the limit. Whether they were emperors, princes, or others, when their lives were exhausted and there were no more spirit herbs to prolong their lives, they would enter the natural transmigration. Only those supreme oracles could enter the Temple of Truth and become one of the revered elders of the secret palace when their lifespans were about to run out, as long as they wanted to. The secret palace would use a secret spell to put them into a state of hibernation, preserving them almost indefinitely. Over time, the secret palace had saved countless supreme oracles whose lives were almost exhausted, and some of them were even revered elders who had entered hibernation hundreds of generations ago. These supreme oracles still had 30 to 50 years to live, and the shortest ones only had 3 to 5 months to live. But, no matter how long they had left, once they recovered from hibernation, they would be able to exert the overall strength of supreme oracles, enough to fight against primordial experts. Although the use of some powerful forbidden spells could directly drain their lives, as long as they could seriously injure an enemy, Diyu would benefit, and the revered elders would not suffer a loss. The cultivation techniques of the human race were the fastest to master. As long as one's aptitude was suitable, a supreme oracle could master it in no more than 100 or 200 years. Even if only 30 to 50 supreme oracles volunteered to enter the Temple of Truth and become revered elders of the secret palace every period, since the establishment of Diyu and the secret palace, there had been thousands or even tens of thousands of revered elders. Perhaps not even the first master of the secret palace could figure out how many revered elders were hibernating in the Temple of Truth. These hibernating worshippers were the ultimate strategic force of Deyu, a force that deterred the celestial court and the Buddhist sect from acting recklessly. Regardless of the apocalypse of heaven and earth, or any other calamities, Deyu would rely on this army of sinecures to stand tall. Compared to Deyu's enormous number of revered elders in the secret palace, the celestial court and the Buddhist League's forces on the surface were pitiful. For example, the celestial court only had 6 first-tier primordial immortals, the great celestial emperor and the 5 celestial emperors of 5 directions, while the Buddhist League only had Lord Buddha, Amitabha, and the other 3 Buddhas. The celestial court and the Buddhist League had no more than 22nd-tier primordial immortals, less than 43rd-tier primordial immortals, and only about 3 to 404th-tier to 7th-tier primordial immortals. The number of 8th-tier and 9th-tier primordial immortals was slightly higher, but if those primordial immortals who had forcibly stepped into the realm of primordial with the boundless virtues of the mortal worlds were taken into account, they would probably not be as large as the population of a remote village in Deyu. But now, the Temple of Truth had been invaded, and the lives of all revered elders were in the hands of outsiders. King Yangshan and the others were not only sweating, but there was even a faint layer of grease oozing out from under their skin. They were so frightened by Buddha Soul's words that they were almost scared to death. In a state of hibernation, the revered elders of the secret palace had no power at all. They lay there like a pile of living dead, and even a 3-year-old child could kill them by cutting their throats with a knife. Now, the one in the Temple of Truth was not a 3-year-old child with a knife, but Buddha Soul, the founding patriarch of the evil Buddhist League. The kings of the council stood there stiffly, their minds blank, and they were completely at a loss. King Xian Shan and his followers, on the other hand, threw their heads back and roared wildly. They had seized the most important lifeline of Deyu, and now they had an absolute strategic advantage. Nearly 1,000 pitch-black supreme towers slowly appeared next to King Xian Shan and the others. At the top of each supreme tower stood a supreme oracle who emitted a strong aura of the ghost god. The top of each supreme tower was filled with oracles from the Directorate of Celestials, all of whom were clad in black robes. These supreme towers had all shown their original size, hovering in midair like hills. When nearly 1,000 supreme towers were put together, a strong pressure came blowing at them, putting a heavy pressure on their nearly shattered minds. Staring fixedly at the 3-foot-long eyebrows on the supreme tower closest to King Xian Shan, King Yang Shan snapped, "Yu Chao Bu Huang, where are your Grand Oracle and left and right oracles of the Directorate of Celestials?" The old man grinned as plumes of black cold air visible to the naked eye kept spewing out of his mouth. "They are dead," he said in a low voice. "Don't ask me how they died. Anyway, they are dead." With a strange laugh, Yu Chao Bu Huang pointed complacently at the supreme towers and oracles around him and said, "Liang Zhu has been in a constant struggle these days. The Crown Prince and you are fighting for the throne, while the Directorate of Celestials has remained neutral. All the oracles have been ordered to stay in the Directorate of Celestials." All the oracles have been ordered to stay in the Directorate of Celestials. Taking a deep breath, Yu Chao Bu Huang narrowed his eyes and said, "So, with a special medicine, all those who disobeyed the Crown Prince are dead." King Yang Shan felt a sharp pain in his chest, and blood kept coming out of his mouth. He almost died from the pain, but even as he coughed up blood, he pointed at Yu Chao Bu Huang and roared, "Vile spawn, how can you face your ancestors, the sacred emperor of Yu Chao clan? You, the Directorate of Celestials, they. Yu Chao Bu Huang looked at King Yang Shan as if nothing had happened. "Yu Chao clan? I've been reincarnated for 10,000 lifetimes, and I've long cut off all ties with the mortal world. It's true that I was once a human being, and Yu Chao clan is my ancestor. But now, I'm Monk Wu Chao, one of the future Buddhas of the Buddhist League. What happened to Yu Chao clan has nothing to do with me." King Yang Shan shut his mouth and pointed at Yu Chao Bu Huang, trembling. Blood kept gushing out of his chest, but he forced himself to swallow it all back down. Blood gushed out of his nostrils and stained his upper body, making him look extremely hideous. Wu Qi could not bear to watch this, so he snorted lightly. Princess Zhanglu quickly came to King Yangshan's side and pressed her palm on his back, injecting a rich wood element life force into his body. At the same time, she fed him a few tribulation pills, which Patriarch Jiang Yun had concocted in the past few years according to the prescriptions in Yuan Ling's alchemy manual. The tribulation pills were very strong, and their main ingredients were the sap of various innate divine trees found in Yuan Ling's nether realm. As soon as the pills entered his mouth, they melted into a stream of clear spirit liquid, turning the blood in King Yangshan's stomach into a fragrant breeze that circulated through his body. All his injuries were healed in an instant, and even his natal energy essence was greatly improved. Wu Qi snorted lightly, then stared coldly at Yu Chao Bu Huang and said, "You're so arrogant and complacent because Buddha's soul has occupied the Temple of Truth, aren't you?" King Xian Shan laughed heartily. "Yes, Buddha's soul has occupied the Temple of Truth. Not only that, but I'm afraid the few old fogies of the secret palace are all dead by now, aren't they? Hee, King of East Sea, you'd better withdraw the formation. Now that I have the upper hand, it's useless for you to struggle desperately." Before King Xian Shan's voice could fade away, Wu Qi casually pointed out a finger, and Yu Chao Bu Huang's head exploded into pieces. The terrible power of the formation crushed Yu Chao Bu Huang and his supreme tower to pieces in an instant. Monk Wu Chao, one of the future Buddhas of the Buddhist League, had just been complacent for a short while before he was killed by Wu Qi. King Xian Shan was so frightened that he shut his mouth and almost bit his tongue off. Wu Qi looked coldly at King Xian Shan and snapped, "Come, Buddha soul, let's have a competition. You kill those revered elders in the Temple of Truth, and I'll kill your lackeys here. Many of these oracles are the reincarnations of your Buddhist League, aren't they? Let's see if you kill all those revered elders first, or I'll kill all your fellow bald donkeys first." The many kings of the council screamed in horror at Wu Qi's move. King Yangshan and a few others rushed to Wu Qi's side, grabbed the leg hair on Wu Qi's thigh, raised their heads, and cried out, "King of East Sea, you can't do it, you can't do it. You can't be impulsive." In front of Wu Qi's lofty avatar, King Yangshan and the others were as small as ants. They could only grab and pull Wu Qi's leg hair, causing Wu Qi to grimace in pain. Wu Qi snorted coldly and said, "I don't have time to think about that. Your Highnesses, I'll have to exchange a life for a life. After I kill King Xian Shan and these reincarnations of bald donkeys, I'll kill that Buddha soul as well." Without waiting for King Yangshan and the others to speak, Wu Qi pointed his finger out. Dozens of tiny beams of light appeared out of thin air and tied them up tightly, making them unable to move or even speak like rice dumplings. Wu Qi cried out at the top of his voice, "Buddha soul, come, come. You kill the revered elders, and I'll kill the monks. Let's see which of us can kill better, and who can cause us endless trouble. I, Wu Qi, am just a man in the wilderness, and I don't bring glory and wealth with me when I'm alive. Ha! Even if I'm hunted down by Yu in the future, Lao Tzu can just cut his own throat and be a good man again 18 years later." Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi snapped, "But you, Buddha soul, if you watch Lao Tzu kill all these reincarnations of bald donkeys, how many people in the Buddhist League will you offend?" Hee, Lao Tzu has only lived for a few hundred years, but Lao Tzu will not suffer a loss in exchange for your endless life. Amidst his wild laughter, Wu Qi waved his hand, and another oracle who had betrayed the Directorate of Celestials and Yu was smashed to pieces by Wu Qi's palm. Buddha soul's roar towered into the sky, "Stop, you lunatic. Let's talk this out." The bold were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of the reckless. That was exactly what Wu Qi was doing now. Buddha soul was just an evil Buddha, not a mad Buddha. So, how could he risk his life to fight Wu Qi? Grinning coldly, Wu Qi said, "In short, if one of the revered elders in the Temple of Truth dies, I'll kill everyone here." Buddha soul cried out, "I've already killed a few old fools from the secret palace, and they won't come back to life." "Forget about those who are already dead," said Wu Qi in a deep voice, "but you can't kill them now. Let's talk it out and see how we can clean up this mess." King Yangshan and the other kings of the council, who were imprisoned by Wu Qi, breathed a heavy sigh of relief, and the way they looked at Wu Qi was much more relaxed. Chapter 885. 300 flying ships lined up in a phalanx, blotting out the sky as they drifted southward like dark clouds. More than 300 of such large flying boats had passed. The flying boats were filled with the soldiers of the Flying Bear Army, the private guards of the major families, their families, and the countless heavenly treasures that they had accumulated over the years. King Yangshan and the others came to an abrupt halt. They stared at the man in disbelief, and at the same time let out cries of surprise, disbelief, and disbelief. Ao Buzan clenched his two little claws and was struck dumb for a moment. The loss of the great clans was one thing, but the greatest loss was to the military court and the Directorate of Celestials. Smoke and dust billowed as King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and a few other princes left southward with nearly half of the great clans in Liangzhu. Half of the supreme towers in the secret vault of the Directorate of Celestials, which cost countless materials to make, were taken away. If it had not been mentioned during the negotiation, and if Wu Qi had not forced King Xian Shan and the others to leave half of the supreme towers behind by force, perhaps for a long time to come, even if Deyu used a mystic art to produce supreme oracles, he would still be in a predicament of not having any supreme towers to use. The 17 kings of the council roared and leaped at the man. What the hell? What the hell? He's a zombie. Damn it, he's a zombie. Ao Buzan screamed as he locked his claws into an incantation gesture, and a magnificent dragon-shaped thunderbolt smashed toward the man with a terrible boom. Not to mention the military court, all the generals loyal to Deyu were assassinated, including the military minister and the right and left military ministers, and even their clans were slaughtered by the Flying Bear Army in a short time. Now, there was not a single regular army of Deyu around Liangzhu, and Wu Qi's East Sea County was now the most elite and powerful force outside the city. King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and everyone related to them showed up obediently, followed King Xian Shan and King Li Shan out of Liangzhu with their families. Almost half of the powerful clans in Liangzhu had some important members who had betrayed Deyu. They packed up their belongings and left Liangzhu and Yuxiong Plain on flying ships in huge phalanxes, going to the southern provinces under their control to build their foundations. The first master of the secret palace and the elders of the Board of Elders were killed by Buddha's soul from behind with an unknown evil art, and the first master of each branch palace was also killed by him. Although the frontline army had promoted a group of surviving supreme oracles to take over the duties of these branches, the secret palace had lost at least 40% of its strength. Lao Tzu sent the human emperor flying with a thunderbolt. Fuck you. More than 1,000 supreme towers guarded these flying ships and left, and there were thousands of oracles flying in the vicinity of each supreme tower. Almost half of the powerful clans had betrayed Deyu, and Deyu's national strength was immediately weakened by more than half. It was not only the people from these powerful clans who had left Deyu, but also the provinces under their control. Without a doubt, those places no longer belonged to Deyu. In this way, Deyu's territory was like a ragged fishing net that was cut into pieces. Once a conflict broke out between these provinces, the whole Deyu would be thrown into chaos. Wu Qi had threatened King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and those around them with the lives of King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and those around them. No one knew how many of those supreme oracles around them were reincarnated members of the Buddhist League, but Buddha's soul dared not to hurt any of the revered elders of the secret palace. But, Buddha's soul did not have the courage to risk his life like this with Wu Qi. If Buddha's soul killed those reincarnated members of the Buddhist League, not to mention how Lord Buddha Amitabha would punish him, even the masters, disciples, relatives, and friends of those reincarnated members would grind Buddha's soul's bones to ashes. On top of that, they would guarantee that Buddha's soul would not die, but he would have to taste the endless torment of purgatory for the rest of his life. A beam of golden sword energy towered into the sky, sweeping out in all directions with a mighty pressure. But what made King Yangshan and the others want to slit their own throats was the loss of the Directorate of Celestials. The Grand Oracle, Left and Right Oracles, and the masters of the various palaces were all poisoned to death. Except for Yuchao Buhuang and other traitors who had betrayed Deyu, all the other oracles loyal to Deyu were killed in a day. Now, The only ones around Liangzhu who could still be of use were the oracles of the various kings and powerful clans. In the former site of Deyu's imperial palace, a group of Deyu's subjects sat on the ground, weeping quietly. When had Deyu ever suffered such a heavy loss? Even Wu Qi, who had been the most indifferent to the matter, was affected by the mournful atmosphere. With his head drooping, he sat feebly next to King Yangshan, grabbing Ao Buzan's tail and swinging him around like a windmill. Just as he was jumping around Wu Qi's head, a figure suddenly appeared out of thin air behind Wu Qi without making any noise. Ao Buzan gave the figure a sideways glance, then lost his footing and fell off Wu Qi's head with a loud howl. Dragons were the gods of wind, rain, and thunder, and Ao Buzan, the Arko Zhu Long, was the lord of all thunder and lightning. Startled, he instinctively used a bit of his vital qi to release the lightning. The power of this lightning was frighteningly great. Wu Qi was willing to risk everything to fight Buddha's soul. Even though a large number of revered elders of the secret palace had died because of him, as Wu Qi had said, he was a man of the wilderness, a worthless commoner. Even if he committed a serious crime, he would only be hunted down by Deyu, and he would not have to kill himself and be reincarnated as a man 18 years later. As for the revered elders of the Temple of Truth, Buddha's soul kept his promise and didn't kill them. However, he used the Buddhist, illusory mirage reincarnation grand technique to trap the souls of these hibernating revered elders and even used some strange secret medicine to restrain their bodies. If these two restrictive spells could not be lifted, even if those revered elders woke them up, they would still be crippled. The entire revered elders of the secret palace had almost lost all their fighting force, which was a devastating blow to the foundation of Deyu's rule. Ao Buzan, whose body had shrunk to a length of 1 foot, felt dizzy because of Wu Qi's attack. He lazily grabbed Wu Qi's arm and refused to let go. When Wu Qi let go of his tail, Ao Buzan triumphantly climbed onto Wu Qi's head, stood up on Wu Qi's head like a human, and walked back and forth on his head. However, he was now in the form of a little dragon, and yet he was walking like a human, which looked a little funny no matter how one looked at it. As soon as the man emerged from behind Wu Qi, Ao Buzan's thunderbolt struck him squarely in the face. Ao Buzan's thunderbolt was too fast, and Arko Zhu Long's natal thunderbolt was thousands of times faster than ordinary thunderbolts. Coupled with the divine ability of the ancient dragon god to destroy evil and break armor, the man was knocked flying away by the thunderbolt before he could react. 70% of the newly formed Flying Bear army had betrayed Deyu, and they had left with the army. In the turmoil that day, almost all the important figures of Deyu's Directorate of Celestials were killed, and those who survived were all related to King Xianshan. 70% of the soldiers had left Deyu, while the remaining 30% had been killed by their own comrades in the turmoil that day. Therefore, Buddha's soul gave in, and so did King Xianshan. Therefore, everyone sat down and, calmly, carried out a friendly and restrained negotiation. After 3 days and 3 nights of intense negotiation, the two sides finally reached an agreement, signed a formal treaty, and swore an oath of life to ensure that the agreement would be carried out smoothly. That was all they had lost in terms of personnel, and the loss of other resources was even more indescribable. King Yangshan and the other kings of the council, as well as all the courtiers, dropped to their knees at the same time and cried out respectfully, "Your Majesty." The man flew up from the crater created by the thunderbolt in a disheveled manner, then coughed violently and awkwardly. Buddha's soul was one of the core higher-ups of the Buddhist League, so he naturally knew that in order to plot against Deyu, the Buddhist League had begun to plot against Deyu dozens of generations ago. Since then, they had been secretly playing tricks in the transmigration, mixing some important figures of the Buddhist League who were not very likely to be reincarnated in Deyu into Deyu's clans. Among the more than 1,000 supreme oracles held hostage by Wu Qi, there were more than 100 almighty experts of the Buddhist League. If any of them went against Buddha's soul with all their strength, he would be in a life-or-death situation. For example, near Wu Qi's East Sea, the provinces in the south, southwest, and west were all controlled by the direct descendants of Chao Buhuang, who was killed by Wu Qi. Once the cause of Chao Buhuang's death was known to those people, Wu Qi did not believe that they would not attack the East Sea. When that happened, the East Sea would be attacked by enemies on 3 sides, and it would be very lively if a war broke out. There were also countless Dayu generals riding flood dragons, chilins, rocks, and other mounts flying all over the sky, urging the army to travel at high speed to the south. Each of these Dayu generals had a profound cultivation base, so their laughter could still reach Liangzhu like thunder from thousands of miles away. It made King Yangshan and the others, who were standing on the southern wall and watching them leave, very angry. Torch Dragon had destroyed the entire imperial palace, and more than 90% of the enormous wealth Dayu had accumulated over the generations had been lost in the many secret vaults. All the books and treasures of the Directorate of Celestials had been taken away by Chao Buhuang and others. Because the books and treasures in the secret palace had been preserved with a mystic technique, they had not suffered too much damage. However, some of the precious materials in the secret palace had been taken away. The loss was so great that many of the kings of the Imperial Council who heard the list of losses fainted. When King Xian Shan and the other powerful clans left, Liangzhu was almost an empty city. Apart from King Yangshan and the other kings of the Imperial Council, as well as the private guards of the powerful clans who were still loyal to Dayu, there was no organized army in Liangzhu. The various losses made King Yangshan and the others burst into tears, and they almost cried themselves to death. King Yangshan and the others jumped to their feet at the same time. They, who had been mentally and physically exhausted by the continuous changes of the past few days, suddenly found the best way to vent their anger. Catch that audacious thief and cut him into pieces. King Yangshan roared. A thunderbolt exploded, and the man, who had been thrown hundreds of miles away, fell heavily to the ground. A pillar of lightning erupted near his face, turning into a terrible bolt of lightning dozens of miles in diameter and shooting into the sky, roaring and spreading in all directions. Ao Buzan, on the other hand, felt very good about himself. Waving his front claws, he muttered complacently, "Who can step on the head of that old fart Yuan Ling like Lao Tzu?" TSK, even the strongest few ancient fiend gods did not get such treatment. Tisk, I'll step on Lao Tzu. Step on him with all my might. The essence of the Directorate of Celestials was almost wiped out, and what was even more heartbreaking was the loss of the secret palace. Chapter 886. Standing in the center of where Mount Torch Dragon used to be, Emperor Haozuan raised the Xianyuan sword and thrust it into the ground. Torch Dragon had destroyed the imperial palace of Dayu with the sun and moon torch. The beautiful garden was melted into lava, and when it cooled, it condensed into a flat rock formation. As the sword was thrust into the ground, Emperor Haozuan kept reciting an incantation, and Liangzhu's defensive formation was activated once again. The ground began to wriggle like soft gelatin, and at the same time, the 108,000 bronze pillars that had been used to trap Torch Dragon burst into a dazzling light. With these pillars as the core, dazzling patterns of formations that looked like peonies emerged with a whistling sound, and the world was instantly filled with a strong black and red light. Standing on the ground, Wu Qi and the others felt their footing become unstable, so they hurriedly flew up into the air. The earth began to undulate, and like a melting candle, mountains and hills slowly rose up. Surrounding the pillars that were emitting strong light, mountains began to appear one after another. The mountains formed mountain ranges, with valleys and hills in between. Heavy rain poured down from the sky, forming rivers, lakes, and ponds between the mountains and hills. At last, even the few seas in the distance were gradually filled with water. In just a few hours, the imperial palace of Dayu, which had been completely destroyed by Torch Dragon, had been restored to its original state. On top of the wriggling mountains, tall and magnificent palaces and pavilions grew straight out of the ground. Any stone in Yuxiong Plain was a rare energy stone or a fine jade in the outside world, and every part of these palaces and pavilions contained an enormous amount of natural energy, glinting brilliantly in the sunlight. Countless colorful specks of light flew out of Emperor Haozuan's sleeve. As soon as the seeds of these exotic flowers and plants fell onto the mountains and hills, they immediately took root and sprouted. The natural energy here was extremely abundant, and the rain falling from the sky was actually a liquid containing very strong first-wood energy. As a result, these seeds grew and grew like crazy, and the crackling of branches as they sprouted could be heard everywhere. A day and a night later, a dense forest 1,000 feet high had once again covered the vast imperial garden. Exotic flowers and plants were everywhere, and spirit herbs such as Ganoderma, ginseng, sealwort, fleeceflower, and so on had grown densely under the roots of towering trees. Apart from the fact that these spirit herbs were far less mature than the original garden, the whole place was no different from the original one. On the contrary, the architecture was even more exquisite and magnificent. The former Mount Torch Dragon was replaced by a great peak, and a winding mountain path still stretched all the way up to the top of the mountain. A great hall, 10 times larger than the original Yuxiong Palace, stood on the top of the mountain. A vast amount of natural energy poured down from the sky like a waterfall, pouring straight into the new Great Hall. The remaining 100,000 or so courtiers of Diyu burst into laughter. As Emperor Haozuan's figure gradually faded away, the people walked slowly into the Great Hall according to their ranks and bowed to Emperor Haozuan, who sat on the throne. After going through so many things, Great Yu had suffered a terrible loss, and yet, Emperor Haozuan had returned unscathed. Everyone felt at ease and had enough confidence in their hearts. King Yangshan and the other kings of the council came forward one after another, reporting what had happened in the past few days to Emperor Haozuan. Emperor Haozuan nodded noncommittally. After listening to the reports, he said with a cold grin, "I've seen all these things with my own eyes in the past few days, hee." Emperor Haozuan shook his head with a grin and said indifferently, "King Baishan, you are just a temporary replacement for the throne. Today, you will return the throne to me." After King Baishan was killed, Emperor Haozuan had chosen an idle king from the imperial clan to replace him. During the turmoil of the past few days, the king's performance had been lackluster, and he had just been idling around. Emperor Haozuan had seen it all. Upon hearing the emperor's order, the king bowed slightly and obediently returned to the ranks of the idle kings of the imperial clan. The great hall fell into a dead silence. Everyone knew that the titles of the 18 kings of Diyu were fixed. No matter how the titles of the other kings changed, the titles and power of these 18 kings would not change. Emperor Haozuan had asked the temporary king to resign from the title of King Baishan. So, was he going to choose another person to replace him? In Great Yu's imperial court, the king of the council of ministers held a position that was second only to one but above all others. Basically, he was the prime minister and the supreme marshal of the army. He was also in charge of government affairs, military affairs, taxation, and the like. Except for Gao, the king of Wei Shan, who was also a temporary replacement, and King Baishan's bloodline had been killed, the other 16 kings of the council had been handed down since the founding of Diyu. Emperor Haozuan fixed his eyes on Wu Qi and said in a deep voice, "King of East Sea has done a great job this time. For the time being, I will assume the title of King Baishan as the King of East Sea. If you can make more contributions in the future, the title of King Baishan will be yours." Wu Qi strode out of the ranks and bowed to Emperor Haozuan to express his gratitude. For the time being, he would assume the title of King Baishan as the King of East Sea. As long as he made new contributions, he could officially assume the title of King Baishan and become one of the kings of Diyu's imperial council. To be honest, Wu Qi was a little surprised by this big pie. With so many kings, members of the imperial clan, and powerful clans in Diyu here, such an important post should not have fallen into Wu Qi's hands. But, Emperor Haozuan must have lost his trust in these clans and powerful clans. Looking at the only 100,000 courtiers left in the Great Hall, the crowd realized that this hall used to house more than 300,000 courtiers who represented the great clans of Diyu. But, after several upheavals, 60 to 70% of them were gone, and only about 30% were left. Some of them were killed in the last purge, some had abandoned Diyu with King Xian Shan and King Li Shan and went to the south to establish their own power, and some were killed by the soldiers in the last 2 days. Now, there were only a few of them left. Were all these courtiers who stayed in Yuxiong Palace really loyal to Diyu? Perhaps no one present dared to think so, let alone Emperor Haozuan. Even Emperor Haozuan's son had betrayed him. Who could guarantee that there were not 3 to 5, or even 30 to 50,000 courtiers who were spies planted by the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League? Emperor Haozuan's cold and merciless eyes swept across the many courtiers in the Great Hall, and all of them bowed their heads respectfully, not daring to look him in the eye. Only Wu Qi looked at Emperor Haozuan indifferently. He had no guilt in his heart and there was no mental pressure, so he looked straight into the emperor's eyes. His eyes were as clear as water, and there was a look of determination in them. Emperor Haozuan nodded appreciatively at Wu Qi, then said in a deep voice, "If not for the King of East Sea's swift and decisive investigation of the Mahjong incident, I'm afraid you would have been in chaos for a long time. Especially you, King Yang Shan, you have disappointed me. I can't believe you surrendered and let the rebels send you to prison. If not for the King of East Sea attacking the city with his army, wouldn't you have been killed long ago? If you die, what will happen to Dayu's government?" King Yang Shan's face turned purple. He looked at Emperor Haozuan awkwardly and explained in a low voice, I'm afraid. The secret edict came strangely, and I'm suspected. King Xian Shan made himself the crown prince. You are afraid of being accused of assassinating me, said Emperor Haozuan coolly, so in order to prove your innocence, you allowed the rebels to send you to prison. How ridiculous. As long as you are selfless, so what if you summon an army and kill the rebels? With a cold snort, Emperor Haozuan sneered at the courtiers in the great hall and said, "Look at you. Hasn't you been too peaceful all these years? You have all forgotten the courage of our ancestors. The rebels are committing all kinds of crimes, but you are doing nothing. If not for the King of East Sea's shrewdness and ability to find out what is wrong, you would have given Dayu's foundation to outsiders." A gray-haired king murmured in a low voice, "We just don't want to break the rules of our ancestors." Emperor Haozuan roared, "Nonsense. What's the use of our ancestors' rules now? With so many members of the imperial clan and powerful clans rebelling, what's the use of our ancestors' rules? If we still abide by those rules today, we will be wiped out." Pointing a finger at Wu Qi, Emperor Haozuan snapped, "The King of East Sea and King Wei Shan are both leading an army outside Liangzhu. The King of East Sea came to Liangzhu within 10 days to suppress the rebellion, stabilize the court, and safeguard the throne of Dayu. Where is the law-abiding King Wei Shan? Where is he? Where is he? He is commanding the Yuxiong army, the most elite army of Dayu. Where is he now?" King Yang Shan snorted awkwardly and dared not speak. Just now, a messenger came with a message that the Yuxiong army led by Gao was still 3 days away from Liangzhu. Along the way, he did not dare to attack the towns and cities, so he could only beg them to make way for him. If they refused to make way, he would take the army around them. So, the speed of the army was very slow. The rebellion in Liangzhu had been quelled, but he was still on his way. Looking at the embarrassed faces of the courtiers, Emperor Haozuan snorted coldly and ordered his men to prepare the imperial edict. Torch Dragon had destroyed the entire palace. Fortunately, many of the eunuchs had cultivation bases, and they were lucky enough to fly into the sky and escape. Therefore, when Emperor Haozuan gave the order, he had a few eunuchs around him. The imperial edicts stored in the palace had been destroyed, so the eunuchs found a piece of black satin, mixed the blood of spirit beasts with cinnabar, and presented it to Emperor Haozuan. Emperor Haozuan personally wrote an imperial edict and gave it to Wu Qi, ordering Wu Qi to command the army of the East Sea and suppress the eastern region of Dayu. He could deploy the troops and military supplies in the provinces east of Liangzhu at will. His main responsibility was to suppress the rebellion and kill the rebels, and at the same time, deal with the various means of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. In the edict, Emperor Haozuan also gave Wu Qi the terrible power to execute without reporting to the higher-ups. He could punish all the civil and military officials in the provinces east of Liangzhu at will. When Wu Qi took over the imperial edict, all the civil and military officials in the hall were staring at him with shock in their eyes. There were only a few times in the history of Dayu that such an edict had been issued, but at that time, it was when the apocalypse of heaven and earth had affected Pangu continent, and the human race was facing a catastrophe. At that time, the human emperor was ordered by the sacred emperor to select good courtiers and valiant generals to fight for survival with all the strength of Dayu. Today, Emperor Haozuan had given Wu Qi such a power. Not to mention how much power Wu Qi had gained, the meaning behind it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. Could it be that the human race on Panga continent was facing a great catastrophe once again? Chapter 887. Facing the rising sun in the east, the fleet of flying ships of the East Sea Army streaked across the sky and flew toward the East Sea. Compared to when they first arrived, the number of flying ships of the East Sea Army had doubled, and they were loaded with more people and more things. As Wu Qi was ordered to suppress all the eastern provinces, he needed a lot of ordnance and supplies. Therefore, Emperor Haozuan had supplied him with a lot of raw materials and expert craftsmen. Although Dayu's imperial clan and aristocratic clans had suffered great losses after the two major upheavals, the low-level craftsmen were not harmed at all. With a wave of his hand, Emperor Haozuan had given Wu Qi 2 million skilled craftsmen. Together with their families and relatives, more than 20 million people were going back to the East Sea with Wu Qi. Standing triumphantly on the prow of Wu Qi's warship, Ao Buzan waved his hands and laughed. I can't believe Lao Tzu gave the human emperor a good beating. Ha ha ha. Lao Tzu's hands are really amazing. I can't believe he actually beat the human emperor. Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan was showing off his glorious achievement of sending Emperor Haozuan flying away with a thunderbolt. Lord Xiansheng and a few others who were clear-headed ignored him. If it were not for the fact that Ao Buzan was Wu Qi's mount, the fact that Wu Qi had made a great contribution, and the fact that he had a large number of troops at the gate of Liangzhu, the kings of the council would have asked for an imperial edict to chop Ao Buzan into pieces for Ao Buzan's offense against Emperor Haozuan. Yet, this fellow was still proud of himself for beating Emperor Haozuan. He wondered how many pedantic subjects of Dayu were eyeing his head now. It was just that it was difficult to make a move in front of Wu Qi, but if Ao Buzan dared to leave Wu Qi's side in the future, there might be someone who would sneak up on Ao Buzan and kill him. In his previous life, he had done that to White Emperor's daughter, and was skinned and made into a storage ring. In this life, he had beaten Emperor Haozuan. With how cruel and merciless those oracles of Dayu were, if he was killed by them, he could only be a toilet bowl for the rest of his life. Therefore, Gold Horn and Silver Horn, who were on good terms with Ao Buzan, wisely stayed far away from him. This guy was now a scourge, and they would get themselves into trouble if they got too close to him. In the future, when Wu Qi ordered Ao Buzan to go out with an army, there might be a group of supreme oracles who were loyal to Emperor Haozuan but conservative, waiting for him with bricks in their hands. Standing on the derrick of the ship's mast, Wu Qi glanced around and enjoyed the beautiful scenery. This was one of the good things about Panga continent. The mountains were magnificent, and the scenery was spectacular. Huge mountain ranges, easily tens of thousands of miles high and stretching for hundreds of millions of miles, were everywhere. At the foot of the mountains, the water was dark green, and at the foot of the mountains, a boundless grassland spread out into the distance like an ocean. Roads as thin as hair stretched between the grassland and the mountains, connecting the cities and villages that dotted the boundless land. Because of the vastness of the land, these cities were far apart from each other, and the two closest counties were often separated by millions of miles. As a result, many places had not been visited by humans since ancient times, and still retained the scenery of the primordial era. A large flock of bold birds flew closely behind the East Sea Army's flying ships. The cries of these huge birds with colorful feathers were so melodious that they decorated the formation of flying ships in the East Sea like a cloud of fire. On the grassland below, a large herd of wild beasts was galloping freely, their hooves rumbling like thunder and kicking up clouds of smoke and dust. What a wonderful place! With his arm around Princess Zhang Li's waist, Wu Qi sighed and said in a low voice, "We can't let those people from the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League do harm to us." Princess Zhanglu was also staring at the beautiful scenery in front of her. The primordial Tao of divinity she cultivated was the closest to nature and the laws of heavenly Tao. The impact of this boundless and uninhabited primordial scene was several times stronger than what Wu Qi saw. Amidst this boundless and magnificent nature, Princess Zhanglu vaguely felt that she had become one with the heaven and earth. Every breath she took was the breathing of the heaven and earth, and every beat of her heart was the beating of the heaven and earth. She had a clear feeling that this part of the world could be turned into her weapon, and she could destroy all her enemies at her will. In the primordial Tao of divinity, all the gods were spirits condensed by the world. Princess Zhongli's mind was integrated with this part of the world. In terms of the degree of being one with the world, even Wu Qi was far inferior to Princess Zhonglu, who cultivated the primordial Tao of divinity. Wu Qi still had to work hard to integrate with the world, while Princess Zhonglu herself was a part of this part of the world. The gap between the two was really too big. Feeling Princess Zhongli's aura suddenly become unpredictable, Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. He also integrated his own divine sense into the divine sense that Princess Zhonglu had sent out. The two divine senses perfectly and harmoniously integrated into this part of the world. The world was like a flawless crystal without any impurities, and everything was exposed in their hearts. This was a sudden epiphany. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu felt the operation of the heavenly Tao, and they felt the countless laws and spiritual power that made up this world. The infinite spiritual energy that Wu Qi had secretly stored in the heaven-refining cauldron slowly flowed out of Wu Qi's eyebrows and into their bodies. Their cultivation and spiritual power rose rapidly in this deepest and most essential epiphany. This state lasted for a day and a night, without alarming anyone. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu steadily broke through the first level of the Tao-breaking realm. The Tao-breaking realm was the 6th level, and now the two were on the 5th level together. Wu Qi's understanding of the heavenly Tao in his previous life played a very mysterious role in this process. He taught all his understanding to Princess Zhonglu, and in turn, Princess Zhonglu also fed back her understanding to Wu Qi. The world was like a treasure house, and Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu gained a lot from it. But, this wonderful and indescribable state was suddenly broken by someone. A group of about 100,000 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals suddenly rushed into the void covered by Wu Qi and Princess Zhongli's divine sense like a giant 10,000-watt light bulb, their mouths glowing with a golden light. It was as if a thumb-sized fly had suddenly appeared in a transparent crystal ball, and it was so disgusting that one wanted to vomit. In the chariot surrounded by these celestial soldiers and generals, Lu Bang, whose clothes were disheveled, was caressing a beautiful, naked fairy maiden. Some unknown liquid was slowly flowing between the fairy's legs. Clearly, they had just done something good. Princess Zhonglu flew into a rage. Shameless bastards! I'll kill them right now, she cried out sternly. The 5-colored divine light whistled up, turned into a mountain shrouded in mist, and was about to smash down on Lu Bang's army. With Princess Zhongli's cultivation base of the Tao-breaking realm, this attack was enough to turn Lu Bang and all his subordinates into ashes. But Wu Qi clapped his hands and stopped Princess Zhonglu in time. He laughed and said in a low voice, "Lu Bang is here to disgust people, isn't he? Well, I'll disgust him too." With a strange laugh, Wu Qi pointed a finger out. A beam of blood-red light flew silently into the distance, brushed past the top of a mountain in the distance, and soon disappeared into the back of the mountain range. Just now, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu had covered a very large area with their divine sense. After a full hour, the 100,000 celestial soldiers and generals led by Lu Bang finally stopped in front of the army of the East Sea. A handsome immortal in a purple-gold robe flew forward and roared at the army of the East Sea, "Lu Bang, the heavenly god of the Tushita 5 Thunders, the patrolling king of Han, is here. Hurry up and pay your respects." If it were anyone else, they might be polite to this celestial officer, but the man in charge of the front line of the East Sea army was Baiqi, a homicidal maniac. As soon as the name Lu Bang, king of Han, entered Baiqi's ears, his eyes turned scarlet. "Lu Bang, king of Han, is that?" he snapped. Before Baiqi could finish his words, Zhang Yi, who was beside him, hastily covered his mouth. The identity of the people of the 6 states was an absolute secret, and it could never be revealed. If Wu Qi had not made thorough preparations in Liangzhu, Baiqi, Zhang Yi, and their companions would have been discovered by outsiders, and no one knew what kind of trouble they would have caused. Baiqi struggled to pull out his sword and was about to chop the celestial officer into pieces, but Zhang Yi hung on Baiqi's arm like a monkey, daring not to let him go. While both men were entangled in a fierce struggle, a deep and gloomy roar came from a distance. "Shameless villain, Lu Bang, do you still remember me, the hegemon king of Western Chu? If I capture your Lao Tzu alive and make him into a stew in this life, are you still willing to have a share of the soup? Lu Bang, who was sitting in the chariot and caressing the fairy maiden in his arms complacently, suddenly shuddered and turned to look at the mountain in the distance in horror. A great sheet of blood-red light poured down from the peak of the mountain like an ocean. Holding a blood-red spear in his hand, draped in the blood-red banner of Chiyu, and mounted on a dark horse that was dyed red by the blood-red light, Xiang Yu was roaring and galloping towards the mountain with a group of Xiang clan's generals. Amidst the monstrous sea of blood transformed from the banner of Chiyu, at least tens of millions of ferocious-looking heavenly ghosts were roaring and baring their fangs and claws, their bodies covered with bone spikes. It had only been a few years in the outside world, but tens of thousands of years had passed in Wuqi's dark-Yin celestial tower. Originally, Wuqi had only brought a few thousand heavenly ghosts from the ghost realm. But, after tens of thousands of years of worry-free reproduction, and with the abundant food supply from the East Sea, the heavenly ghost's frightening reproduction ability had been vividly demonstrated. During these tens of thousands of years, the population of heavenly ghosts under Wuqi's control had grown to a frightening number of billions. Now, these heavenly ghosts were reproducing and living in Wuqi's interstitial world. Using his mighty magic, Wuqi had connected the yellow spring of the nether world to his interstitial world, creating a filthy world that measured hundreds of millions of miles in circumference. Contaminated by the energy of the yellow spring, these heavenly ghosts had become 100 times more ferocious and stronger than the rest of their kind, and they also had the tenacious life force of the creatures of the yellow spring, which made them nearly indestructible. Xiang Yu came swarming over with tens of millions of heavenly ghosts. With plenty of blood and flesh to feed on, the weakest of these heavenly ghosts, who relied on devouring blood to improve their cultivation base, had the cultivation base of peak-stage heaven immortals. Emanating a terrible killing intent, these heavenly ghosts transformed into a thick cloud of blood and completely drowned Lu Bang's army. A sea of blood rolled and rushed up, and the heavenly soldiers and generals brought by Lu Bang screamed in despair. Then came the sound of bones and flesh being crushed and chewing. In the blink of an eye, 100,000 heavenly soldiers and generals were devoured by tens of millions of heavenly ghosts. A golden dragon soared into the sky, while Lu Bang fled in panic under the protection of Han Xian and the others. Xiang Yu howled and thrust his spear at Lu Bang, followed by tens of millions of heavenly ghosts, who chased after Lu Bang and sped away. Protect the king of Han. Don't let these evildoers hurt him. Wu Qi cried out dryly. Amidst the laughter of the East Sea army, the flying ship continued to fly toward the East Sea. No one cared whether Lu Bang was dead or alive. What did it matter to them? Chapter 888. Xing Yihua, the prefecture overseer of Sun Province, has disregarded the righteousness of the human race and colluded with rebels to commit treason. His crime is unpardonable. By the human emperor's decree, Xing Yihua and his clan are to be executed as a warning to others. With a golden scroll in his hand, Yan Bugue stood on a high step and read aloud. In the courtyard below the steps, thousands of men, women, old, and young knelt trembling, their faces drained of all color. As soon as the words warning to others came out of his mouth, the few criminal officers of the East Sea's punishment court standing next to him drew their blades and swung them. The sharp blade light turned into a curtain of blood and swept out. The Shenzhou prefecture overseer, Xing Yihua, and all his family members kneeling on the ground in the courtyard were cut in half at the waist. Their blood sprayed all over the ground. Their broken bodies writhed and twitched on the ground, and their earth-shattering screams of pain sounded like demons from hell. A chilly wind blew from the corners of the courtyard as a few oracles in black robes recited a spell. A bolt of lightning flashed across the void, sucking in the flesh, blood, and souls of all the members of Xing Yihua's clan. Lei Meng's satisfied sigh drifted down quietly as a great sheet of blood fell from the sky and injected into the bodies of the soldiers and oracles who stood guard around the courtyard. The sacrifice of thousands of fresh blood, flesh, and souls had boosted the cultivation of all the soldiers and oracles on the spot. The pleasant feeling of having their strength soar made them exhale and roar at the same time. Their thunderous roars even made the entire courtyard tremble. A few flying ships flying the flag of the East Sea flew over the wall of the courtyard. Squads of soldiers stood on the deck and kept raining arrows down. Miserable howls could be heard coming from outside the courtyard from time to time, and the smell of blood poured into the courtyard in waves, turning into a suffocating, sweet smell that went straight into the nostrils and made one's skin sticky and uncomfortable. In the square outside the Sun Province Overseer's mansion, tens of thousands of Sun soldiers in pale green armor lay scattered on the ground. A few flying ships were wheeling over the square, from which arrows were constantly being thrown down. There were still more than 1,000 soldiers in the square who were resisting stubbornly. With their shields up, they roared like wounded beasts and charged toward the gate of the Sun Prefecture Overseer Mansion in a frenzy. 10 rows of heavily armored East Sea soldiers stood in Chichi in front of the gate of the Sun Prefecture Overseer Mansion. Each of them was clad in a special heavy armor that was an inch thick, with a heavy tower shield that was a foot thick, 8 feet high, and 2 feet wide in their left hands, and a special spear that was 30 feet long and as thick as an arm in their right hands. Long guns forged from pure metal rose up like a dense forest, blocking the path of the Sinjo soldiers' charge. Behind these 10,000 heavily armored soldiers were 3,000 soldiers armed with specially made heavy crossbows. They fired wave after wave of arrows in unison, working with the arrows raining down from above to reap the lives of Senzu's soldiers. The few main roads leading to the square had been occupied by the East Sea soldiers riding on all kinds of strange beasts. They were not in a hurry to charge, but just stood there calmly and watched the thousands of dying Sinjo soldiers launch a desperate charge. Each time they charged, they would leave dozens of corpses behind. It seemed that it would not be long before they were all killed on the spot. Accompanied by a loud whistle that sounded like a steam whistle, a general of Sinjo, whose body was pierced by at least 30 specially made armor-piercing arrows, rose from the pile of corpses, howling. The general, who stood more than 12 feet tall, raised a crescent-shaped axe that was stained with blood and burned the last bit of his life force to charge at the East Sea soldiers in front of the Sun Prefecture Overseer Mansion. "Your Excellency, I've been ordered to help." The general charged forward with heavy steps and roared, "I've been ordered to help. Your Excellency." With a flash, Huang Liang, clad in a golden armor and emanating a faint air of majesty, came before the burly man. His right hand pierced through the man's armor and body like a sharp blade, and came out from the back of the man's heart. With one strike, Huang Liang had crushed the man's heart and snuffed out the flame of his life. What a valiant general! Too bad, why did he follow a rebel like Xing Yihua? Huang Liang slowly pulled his hand back. The burly man's body twitched, and with the last bit of his strength, he swung his axe at the front gate of the mansion, then fell heavily to the ground. When the hundreds of remaining Sinjo soldiers saw how easily Huang Liang killed the burly man, they howled in despair, threw down their shields and weapons, and dropped to their knees. They had given up resisting and surrendered, but at Huang Liang's order, more than 1,000 East Sea soldiers with tower shields and spears strode forward and mercilessly pierced the soldiers' bodies with their spears, lifting them high into the air. Then, 3 East Sea oracles, who had 9 golden suns embroidered on their sleeves and were emanating powerful energy fluctuations, walked out slowly. They raised their hands and began to murmur incantations. Another flash of lightning flashed in the void, sucking away the tens of thousands of corpses on the square, all the blood and the souls of the soldiers who had not left the battlefield. Large sheets of bloody light that contained great power slowly sprinkled down and fused into the bodies of the soldiers and oracles of the East Sea. Lei Meng's emotional voice echoed over the square, "Tisk, what's wrong with you guys recently? Alas, sacrifices are being offered to me everywhere, and I have to spend a lot of energy to receive them. What a blissful trouble. Won't you be in trouble after offering so many blood sacrifices to me?" Huang Liang narrowed his eyes and smiled. He glanced over his shoulder at Yen Bugue, who was walking out of the mansion with a large number of soldiers. They exchanged a smile and thought, what trouble could there be? Wu Qi was conferred the title of King of East Sea, and the so-called East Sea was the first ocean they encountered when they walked eastward from Liangzhu. There were countless oceans in Liangzhu, but the East Sea occupied the title of first, so it was called the East Sea. It was a huge ocean with a surface area of more than 3,000 provinces. Even a gold immortal would need half a month to fly from the east to the west at full speed. Zhong Province was just the most famous first-grade province on the west side of East Sea. There were 45 first-grade provinces around East Sea that had a similar status as Zhong Province. Each first-grade province governed 300 provinces, and among these over 10,000 provinces, about 40% of them were in cahoots with King Xian Shan, King Li Shan, and the other rebels. By Emperor Haozuan's decree, Wu Qi oversaw the East Sea and suppressed the eastern provinces of Diyu. The first thing he did was to attack the provinces around the East Sea. All the civil and military officials in the provinces where the prefecture overseers and county governors were from the rebellious clans in Liangzhu were completely purged, and those who might be related to King Xian Shan and King Li Shan were collectively detained. As for the other provinces that were determined to have nothing to do with King Xian Shan and King Li Shan, all their armies were incorporated into the East Sea, and Wu Qi had disorganized them at will and stationed them in different places. The army of the East Sea under Wu Qi's direct command marched out of the East Sea and built numerous military towns and checkpoints around the East Sea. Wu Qi did not hesitate to issue a war mobilization order, dragging the whole East Sea and the provinces in the east of Diyu into a state of emergency. In this state of war, all the resources were under Wu Qi's control, all the troops were under Wu Qi's control, and the promotion and dismissal of all the officials were decided by Wu Qi. Under such circumstances, the purged civil and military officials, as well as their families, were sacrificed to Lei Meng. Who would know about this? Even if someone knew, who would dare to leak it? And even if someone did, who would dare to believe him? If someone dared to speak a word of justice for those who were sacrificed, and sympathize with those rebels so much, one must be an accomplice of the rebels. Under Wu Qi's cruel, high-pressure measures, everything went smoothly. The only one who was troubled was Lei Meng. There were more than 10,000 provinces around the East Sea, and each province had thousands of sacrifices, and sometimes hundreds of provinces offered sacrifices to him at the same time. Lei Meng was so tired that he could hardly breathe just by tearing open the void to collect the supreme-grade sacrifices. As Lei Meng said, it was a happy worry. With such a large-scale blood sacrifice, the strength of the soldiers and oracles of Dong Hai was steadily rising, and Lei Meng's strength had also improved by leaps and bounds after receiving so many sacrifices. According to him, his strength was about to break through to the next great realm. As for what realm it was, Lei Meng pretended to be mysterious and refused to tell Wu Qi, and Wu Qi did not bother to ask him for details. After all, there was a blood oath, and Lei Meng had to lend his strength to the oracles of the East Sea when needed. Wu Qi did not care how strong Lei Meng was now. In any case, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang were strong enough to deal with all kinds of troubles. After 3 months of cruel purging, all the provinces around the East Sea were wiped out by Wu Qi. The control of these provinces fell into the hands of the first group of Diyu clan, led by Bo Zhongfu, who submitted to Wu Qi, as well as the imperial clans and clans of the 6 states. Under Wu Qi's order, these provinces began to recruit soldiers on a large scale. All the soldiers were transported to the East Sea and sent to the Spirit Cave under the East Sea to undergo cruel brainwashing and special training. Wu Qi and Princess Zhang had broken through to the Tao-breaking realm, which was the cultivation base of the 5th-tier perfected Golden Immortal. The time in the Dark Yin Celestial Tower had been accelerated by 30,000 times. In 3 months, thousands of years had passed in the Spirit Cave. A large number of well-trained soldiers filled the barracks in the East Sea, and a large number of soldiers were stationed in every military town. As the power of the East Sea gradually increased, Wu Qi issued a mobilization order to attack the provinces further east in the East Sea, which was the eastern border of Diyu. All the provinces that were still loyal to Diyu had submitted their letters of allegiance to Wu Qi, while those provinces that had submitted to the rebels had begun to assemble a coalition army, ready to fight against Wu Qi. Just as Wu Qi was about to lead the troops to wipe out the armies of the rebellious provinces in the East Sea and carry out a super-large-scale blood sacrifice, Princess Zhang suddenly came to Wu Qi with a serious look on her face. Behind her were 30,000 beautiful girls. Dressed in black palace dresses, 30,000 beautiful girls walked quietly into the King of East Sea's mansion, filling the square in front of the main hall of the King of East Sea's mansion. Wu Qi, who was discussing the route of the expedition with Bai Qi and the other generals, stared blankly at Princess Zhang and asked, Zi Xian, what are you doing? With a strange look on his face, Bai Qi and the others quickly left the main hall, leaving Wu Qi and Princess Zhang alone in the spacious hall. Princess Zhang calmly pointed at the door and said, before we go on the expedition to the East Sea, take these girls first. They are the good girls I have carefully selected for you from the imperial clans and clans of the 6 dynasties. Now that you have such a foundation, if you don't have thousands or tens of thousands of children to take care of it, why do you always need the help of outsiders? You should have an heir by now. Proudly raising her chin, Princess Zhang began to count with her fingers. 1 month later, you will have 30,000 months in Dark Yin Celestial Tower, which is more than 2,000 years, enough for you to pamper them several times. In the first half of every month, you must make love to Zi Xian, and in the second half of every month, you must take turns to pamper them. While Princess Zhang was counting with her fingers, Wu Qi's face turned as pale as a sheet of paper.